OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
It was a weekend of excess. We hope you've survived it. Wherever you are in the world, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment in the YouTube stream. In the meantime, it's Jarno with you all the way through until 10 this morning. We've got an incredibly busy programme for you, which is kind of reflective of the type of weekend it was. But at no stage really during that weekend, Owen, could you just sit back, relax and enjoy one thing? Because everything was on at exactly the same time.
That's a problem. People there needs to be like a worldwide sports committee to say, you go here, you go there, and we need to like bash our heads together and come up with something better than this queue of sport that tends to pop up on days like this.
Yeah, it's impossible. Absolutely impossible to keep track of everything that's happening, particularly because like even the run-of-the-mill American tournament at the weekend had two golfers in the playoff, one of whom is a regular on Golf Weekly and the other of whom ended up being tipped by John Duggan, and both of them ended up losing. That was the unfortunate thing for those tipsters. And that was like the least interesting thing that was going on over the course of this unbelievable weekend.
It's true. What tends to happen is that you predict what is going to be the high points of the weekend, and quite often those things just disappoint. As you say, something kind of comes out of the blue and then takes the whole attention. Yeah,
I mean, the other thing is that it's official need like a channel with all of the red zone options open for the GAA matches. As Tommy pointed out, how far have Meath fallen that Meath versus Dublin is going to be exclusively on GAA Go next week? It's like
could be record figures for GAA Go. Maybe not record, but I'd say a lot of people will
could be, yeah.
I guess, how long was it since Dublin last hammered Meath? 8 months, less? I think 8 months is enough for us to forget about everything that happened last year and for us to subscribe to GAA Go for one day only next week.
We're going to have to talk ourselves into it. I'll get Tommy on at some point during the week. How late in the week will it be before Tommy can convince us that Meath are going to beat Dublin?
What it usually takes is like a really good feature in a newspaper, which probably will be Wednesday, Thursday by the time we get there, considering there's enough midweek football to fill column inches. So there'll be a nice colour piece somewhere on Thursday morning that will talk about the glory days of Meath regularly beating Dublin. And that will be the moment that we'll be like, I wouldn't be surprised if they add it down to single figures. Then come the weekend, it'll be
50-50.
50-50.
Could go either way.
Throw in once he sees the Meath men belting out the anthem. It will be, we're going to do this.
You know,
but one day he's going to say that, and it actually will happen.
There you go.
So
there you go. Why not this week, Owen?
Why not this week?
OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors. Here's what's going up between now and 10 AM this morning. We've got the Gillette performance ranking coming up in just a moment. After that, it's going to be David Meyler at 8:05. We'll talk about his mate Jordan Henderson and his other mate Harry Maguire scoring two big headers. Important goals for England against Ukraine. They're through to the semi-finals. We'll talk about that, obviously. Sports Pages, 8:25. Lynne Cantwell going to talk to us about her job in South Africa, where she heads up the high-performance unit for the women's rugby. Coney is our football analyst this morning, talking about, can the Dubs be caught now that Cluxton's gone? James Skehill at 9:05 is going to look at the hurling and the penalty decision that essentially ruined the game between Tipperary and Clare. And then we'll talk some rugby as well. But we'd love to hear from you, as I said. Leave a comment for us on the YouTube stream, or of course you can WhatsApp us 0879 180 180. But it's 7:34 this morning. Let's get right into it. It's the Gillette performance rankings.
You know, that wasn't an All-Ireland winning performance.
Probably should have won the game based on their second half performance.
Is it a step too far to say it was the performance so far of the World Cup? Maybe not.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
I'm scratching my head. That performance was just lacked that intensity.
So we give away a Gillette starter performance pack, a Gillette starter pack, as part of the performance rankings every week. All you got to do is tell us who should be in the green, who should be in the red, and who's in the amber. And if you want to give us those categories, Owen, green is good, I presume.
Green tends to be good, red tends to be bad, and amber tends to be grand. And it's up to you to say why we've got this thing completely wrong. A little bit difficult to pick where certain things go this morning. I think it's fair to say that we know what the big events are from the weekend, but some of them it's kind of hard to realise, is this actually a good thing, is it a bad thing, or is it a grand thing? So I'm open to your criticism this morning. One thing which we can't get away from, which is certainly in the bad, which was the first thing in the red this morning, is the hurling refereeing. And I'm not even sure if it actually comes with the territory of hurling refereeing, hurling rule making, hurling in general. I don't know what is the first negative thing here.
Who is more touchy about the rules than hurling people when it comes down to it? No one. There is no coterie in world sport that is more don't touch our game that is more cocksure that their game is perfect. And you know, they did flag up that there could be some controversy around these rules.
True as that may be, I do think, in fairness, there was a groundswell of opinion that there was cynicism creeping into hurling over the last couple of years. I do think that there's been talk about maybe the high-scoring nature of hurling from the doyens of talking about hurling and writing about hurling. And I think maybe, yeah, that notion is out there that maybe hurling people are quite protective of the game. But I do think, in fairness, there's been a lot of people inside the tent, as it were, to actually encourage this and to try and encourage debate around whether or not rules should be changed. So
Yeah.
I kind of agree with you to a point. But it's interesting what you said there a moment ago. I mean, you're tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but the fact that this penalty decision yesterday kind of ruined the game, and I do think that's kind of factored into maybe a lot of frustration. And I'm not saying this is the entire thing at all, but the idea of this happening at a certain point in the game when an underdog was going very well and it turned again to the point where the underdog stopped doing well, I think that's adding to how emotionally
Explain what
charged this
happened. There's
conversation
a
is.
lot of people, as I said, watching a lot of stuff. So exactly what happened?
So what you've got is a Clareman right inside a tip man right inside the 21-metre line. The problem was he was closer, and so I saw someone pointed this out on social media, he was closer to the Ennis Road than he was to the opposition goal. He was out by the sideline, basically. He goes past his man. His man goes in with a cynical challenge. In fairness, it looked like a cynical challenge. You could almost say, like, what sort of body shape is he in? Did he challenge with his legs? It certainly didn't look anywhere close to legal.
It was like you remember, I don't know if you're old enough to remember Peter Schmeichel being in goals, but Peter Schmeichel used to do the kind of European handball style.
Spread your body wide.
Yeah, and that's what it was like, except it was a kind of a body slam.
Yeah.
WWE.
That's it. And the problem was that there were another two Claremen in the general vicinity of that, also quite close to the Ennis Road. And when play developed, those two men had caught up with play to the point where it really looked like that he was actually in a body of players, let alone being true on goal. And how on earth this could be deemed as a goal-scoring opportunity, one could never really find out an appropriate answer to that question. But one person who did was the referee, and he sent the player to the sin bin, obviously with the new rule, and gave a penalty. So it was extremely punishing for Clare, and as a result of that, Tipperary destroyed them over the course of the next 10 minutes and won the game. It was, in fairness, a huge part in where the result went. I will say one thing is that when we're looking at the analysis of it in the aftermath, those players that are tracking back, it seemed that even on television, they were being highlighted in a place where they had stopped running after the foul had committed, rather than analysing where the players were while the foul was being committed,
Yeah.
aka what the referee saw in real time.
The whole world made their mind up immediately that this decision was outrageous and egregious and an example of the worst excesses of referees and the rules, and this is a complete disaster. But actually, there's loads of mitigating factors, right? One is that if the rules made any sense, you would be able to be sin bin for that, but it not be a penalty, because it was absolutely as cynical a professional foul as you can have in any sport. It was somebody bringing somebody down. He might not have been about to score a goal, but certainly it was. He's creating an overlap where it is 3-on-2, because he's clean through, right? And you're going to foul him closer to the goal and make it a more obvious foul that you're trying to stop the goal scoring opportunity. Like in any intercounty match where you have players who are supremely proficient with the ball in hand, if it's 3-on-2, then there's a goal-scoring opportunity. It's just not completely obvious. And so I think that the double jeopardy that they got rid of in football, soccer, over the last couple of years makes perfect sense. You know, the red card and the penalty is too much. The sin bin and the penalty is too much, particularly when you have players who can pass the ball to the net. I mean, the penalty, we're not going to talk about the penalty enough, right? The penalty was a thing of beauty. He didn't blast it at all. It was just like a little, I'm just going to pass that into the bottom corner of the net, and the Clare goalkeeper doesn't even move, because it's like, he's expecting the blast, and then it's, oh shit, he just Anyway, that was a tangent we didn't need to go down. I think that, like, I have a lot of sympathy for James Owens. He is absolutely getting murdered in the papers today.
And the thing is, like, I think it's the front of the Examiner that asked the question, rule or ref, is it? Or?
The rule or the ref is the front
and
of
I think that's a good. I think it's a good front page. I think like it is. I think to even entertain that question last night might have seemed like sacrilege in the heat of the night. It did feel that this was one man's problem and nobody else was at play here. But I think you're onto something there in terms of the double jeopardy that's actually involved. I do think that the rule is a little bit to blame in this, or at least it gives us a greater understanding.
Well, it's completely to blame. It's completely to blame. The fact that
I do think it's a bit. In fact, I think James Owens is to blame as well. I think it's a bad refereeing decision, and I think it's maybe a bad rule.
You can see how he makes it, because somebody else is pointing out later on that there was on the Examiner podcast last month, the referee had said there's going to be a big controversy when it happens out by the sideline, because obviously the referees have been told you're inside the 21. We're giving these away to stop these types of tackles, which are completely cynical.
And that's it. You've got to ask yourself, why was the rule brought in the first place? And it's actually to stop the type of tackle that occurred in that situation yesterday. Now, the thing is, they wanted that to be in the type of tackle, but in a more central position.
Well, more obvious.
Yeah, more
blatant. But was it not a goal-scoring opportunity? It was.
It ticks one of two boxes for me. It was cynical, but it wasn't a goal-scoring opportunity. And they want to get rid of the cynicism, but they want to get rid of cynicism in a certain area of the pitch, which is a very, very hard thing to legislate for. That is very much into the grey area, and that is why then you leave the referees in a position where they're unable to make the correct calls all of the time. I will say, the reason why James Owens, I would say, is being hammered even more is because on the other end of the pitch, Clare had a stone wall penalty / sin bin, which was not given, and that just will be making the blood of Brian Lohan boil continuously throughout this week. That was a disgrace of a decision if you're going to give one at the other end, and that is why he's being hammered. But I think in isolation, that one incident that everybody's going to be talking about for this week, it is not as much, but it is to do with the rule as well as the ref.
If I was still managing Clare, I'd probably be looking at a lengthy suspension this morning. There's no way I'd be able to keep my mouth shut. What referee James Owens did yesterday was simply off the wall, says Gerlach Nan. The decision to give a penalty coupled with a stint in the sin bin for Ed McCarthy left hurling followers everywhere scratching their head. Some are blaming the rules, but refs always have to use common sense as well as the rule book. So you can't. Do you know, it's...
Unfortunately, I mean, it would be a great world if you could just literally use common sense only, but then there would be no need for a rule book.
Referees still have to gauge a situation and make a call. How Owens thought that incident merited a penalty and sin binning beggars belief. To me, it was one of the most farcical things I've ever seen. And I've been watching hurling for over 50 years. It has to be called out. On RTE, they were droning on and on about the rules.
But the thing is, it probably is one of the most farcical things we've ever seen. And it's just, whose fault is it?
Look, I think that the rule doesn't exist, but you shouldn't be allowed to commit fouls like that, should you?
No, and
So what should the punishment be? Just a yellow card?
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you know?
The thing is, I guess what happens afterwards in terms of the Shanahan foul kind of flies in the face of this. But it would be interesting to see if there is actually a reaction to this. As in, if that is played over again, does the defender all of a sudden not dive into the attacker?
Maybe.
Stands off just a yard, and all of a sudden the goal-scoring opportunity presents itself in a more fair way, because that would be the exact reason why a rule is brought in, to encourage more of that play. So I'll be interested to see if this is actually the outcome. But as I say, what flies right in the face of that is that a few minutes later, Clare should have had the exact same thing, and the rule just...
Well, if he just had done it again, then we'd all be like, oh, they were two, that's very serious, this is having an impact on the game, what was the difference?
And then that's where when it comes back to the ref.
A decision like this brings the game into disrepute. That's the front cover of the Irish Independent this morning, and Nicky English thinks that the decision was so egregious that ultimately they're going to end up changing the rules because of it. I believe what happened may well be a rule-changing event when it's analysed and debated.
And I'll be interested to see what that involves. So does it just go back again to where we were last year?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You know, the hurling managers have, in the past, managed to get every significant rule change kicked out by screaming about it. Don't F with cats.
That's exactly it. For me, the best... Well, what they wanted to achieve with this is to encourage goal-scoring opportunities that can actually make it to the end of play.
Yeah.
Because what we were having goal-scoring opportunities that ended, the vast majority of the time, unless the attacker was extremely quick, was ending in a player being held up, dragged down, and the defender saying, look, I'll take my chances with a penalty here because you are definitely going to score. if you go by me. So they wanted to encourage more of a situation where a defender can be rushed by and maybe doesn't have the advantage of being able to put a player down. That's why they're going for it, and they want to stop cynical tackles. And if that's what happens, then maybe this will have a positive outcome. I do think it was just a terrible look, and I do think if you go back to what you were saying at the start about maybe people in every sport being defensive of their own game and defensive of change, anybody who is even a little bit conscious of what this might do to the game in terms of just general change, then their opinion would be totally hardened after yesterday.
Will says, the Dublin Hurlers beat Galway. They were the second favourites for the All-Ireland. Not one pundit gave them a chance beforehand. If they're not top of the performance rankings, it will render the rankings null and void forever.
Well, we're going to have Galway man James Skehill with us a little bit later on to give us his take on what happened to Galway and what happened to Dublin. I mean, this big step up into like, obviously we have the 2019 memory fresh in our brains after Dublin managed to get through that group, and obviously a couple of weeks later it ended in disappointment. Is this different? We'll get Skehill's take a little bit later on. Of course they're in the green. There's a couple of other things that may have just pipped them, and I apologise in advance for that, but Dublin were great.
You say of course they're in the green, but they're actually not in the green. You can't just
they're
like
notionally in the green.
Yeah, well, you can't just grandfather a lot of things into the green. You made a list, and there's only 2 teams on the list, and they're England and Italy, and I'm giving a spoiler alert.
Listen,
there's no Dublin there.
Mount Rushmore 10 heads is how I would build it if I was doing it.
The mutant Mount Rushmore. Okay, so the hurling refs are in the red, and who are you blaming for it?
If I had to pick one person, I'm still picking James Owens as the scapegoat. It's just how much he's being blamed is maybe the thing I've got issue with. I think it's just a bad refereeing call, and he had a bad day, but he's not helped by the rule.
Has he not literally just done what he's supposed to do and applied the letter of the law? That is a cynical challenge. Within the 21, it's a sin bin and it's a yellow card. Like, I know Brian Lowen saying nobody else in the ground apart from him thought that was a yellow card and a sin bin and a penalty, except probably nobody else actually knew the rules. Nobody else has sat down and studied and gone to a bunch of conferences and had a bunch of Zoom calls and gone, in this instance, what are we doing? Yeah, and we're all agreed, we're all going to do that? Okay, grand. Just the fact that he actually had the balls to do what he was supposed to do, he's getting hammered for it. And it's a stereotypical, like, mob rule, where it's like, but actually, you know what? Like, maybe Clare are going to have to look back and go, how well did we deal with the sin bin? What was our plan for the scenario where one of our players gets sin bin? Because obviously it's a possibility now. Here's our contingency plan. I'm just saying that, like, it's great to have that to and they still got very close to beating Tipperary. And it was a brilliant performance from Clare, other than that 10-minute period.
Yeah, I still think when you're going to those conferences and you're being told about this new rule, the goal scoring opportunity is the key thing, and it's just very hard to see how that actually was one. There's truth in what you're saying. Like, I think with a lot of these, it's kind of like, is it James Owens' fault or is it the rule's fault? Like, is it either or? And like, I do think that there is. The reason why James Owens has a bad day is in part down to him operating a bad rule, or an overly harsh punishment, or it being an impossibly hard game to referee. And the reason why James Owens is getting hammered is because people have got entrenched in that opinion very quickly, and we're seeing an analysis that isn't fully accurate. Like, I do think that the screen grab of the 2 defenders being goal side of the challenge after the challenge happens is just not a fair analysis on James Owens. It has to be, where were the defenders when the foul actually happened, or before the foul actually happened, to actually show was the path clear to goal. But just because you got a clear path to goal doesn't necessarily mean it's goal scoring opportunity because you're out on the sideline. You know, like, I feel for him for sure, but I still think he takes a bit of the blame fairly after yesterday. All
right, what else is in there? Is a Dublin team in your performance rankings, but they're not the hurlers in green. It's
I'm sorry to like sometimes it's just hard to find.
Is this more Kerry nonsense? The Dublin footballers, 6 in a row All-Ireland champions, cruising through the first round of Leinster in 4th gear, first gear. It
depends what sort of. I'm sure they have multiple gears. We all drive automatics now, anyway, don't we? So I don't know what gear they were in.
The sponsored automatics.
Yes, absolutely. like you will never be happy, I think, is what people for the show will realise. Because if I put them in the green, you'd be like, typical nonsense, trying to overplay the Doves. I put them in the grand, the exact same thing. But look, I put them in the red, and I don't know why you're claiming that this is nonsense. This is Dublin, and if you go through their winning margins in Leinster over the last couple of years, we all know that they have been comically ginormous, their winning margins in Leinster, to the point where their 8-point win over Wexford yesterday was their smallest winning margin in Leinster since 2013, when they beat Meath by 7 points. Like, you go back to the good old days of 2012 when they beat Wexford by 4 points and Meath by 3 points, and then 7, as I said, the following year in Meath. And then after that, it was basically all double figures. Kildare lost by 9 points in 2017. Last year, their first game was only an 11-point win against Westmeath in Leinster, and then you get down to 8 yesterday against Wexford. It's not a significant statistic. It shouldn't be a significant statistic, but one of the relentless elements of Dublin was the way in which they managed to put these teams to the sword by 20-something points, despite not playing perfectly and despite the game not being that high stakes. Let's face it, because they were always almost guaranteed to win the game regardless. So are we starting to see a little bit of a lack of relentlessness in an 8-point win? Maybe we are, and that's the key word here, maybe. We can't for certain say whether or not this is going to turn into a hockeying for Meath next weekend or not. Like, it does look extremely promising if you're looking at things in black and white. The fact that Meath put up a 22-point win yesterday against a decent Longford side who a lot of people would have been afraid of, and the team that beat Wexford by 8 points. Like, that should mean a match this week.
You've been drinking the Tommy Rooney Kool-Aid about how that was a banana skin.
But there is a greater context here that this is the greatest football team of all time, in that anytime they've had a wobble, there haven't been many of them, but they have responded and made everybody eat humble pie. I think that Carlow game where Diarmuid Connolly and the linesman had that altercation a few years ago sometimes gets brought up as this moment where they perhaps didn't look great, and like that was a 12-point win, for example. Their next game was against Westmeath and they beat Westmeath by 31 points. So that is the sort of response from Dublin that we've seen whenever they've looked imperfect in Leinster over the years. So that is the caveat for this. But what we can look at is the personnel then, and the squad, and how it's starting to be chipped away at over recent years, and that includes Stephen Cluxton.
Well, I thought you're burying the lead here, getting to this is the most momentous thing that's happened in Gaelic football since last year's All-Ireland final, right?
It 100% is. Will we hear from Dessie Farrell? Let's hear what Dessie Farrell had to say in the aftermath of yesterday's game in regards to Stephen Cluxton.
No, Stephen Cluxton. Stephen's, well, the situation is very simple. Stephen isn't with us at the moment. He's gone back to his club, and he's just taking time to heal the body, maybe to regenerate the appetite. I don't know, to be honest, whether Stephen will be back or not. But he's not retired, and he's just stepped away. And I think we've spoken about it as a group. I think he, given the service he's provided over the years, he deserves that respect and that time and space to make up his mind.
Have you spoken to him?
Yeah, we've been in contact, yeah. So
do you get a sense that you'll see him this year, or
have
you any clarity on that?
I don't know is the honest answer, and it's not that we're trying to play games here in any way. He's asked for time, and I think he deserves the time, and at the end of the day, the service he's given to the county has been immense, and when a man has to step away and take time out, I think a player like Stephen Cluxton deserves that, and we all need to respect that.
Would you have a deadline, Dessie? Would you have a deadline for when you'd like to see him back in, given you two young keepers?
We've always operated on the basis that we've an open door policy. That was the same for the last management team. It was the same for any team that I managed at minor under 21 level, and if there's players out there and they're willing to contribute and we feel they've a contribution to make, then the door is open for sure.
Has Stephen been in, which is at all this year?
He's back with his club. He's done some sessions with the coach, goalkeeping coach, all right, but for now he's with his club.
Right, so all that stuff about him being on the return to play stuff from Kieran Kilkenny wasn't quite the full story. I'm going to the newspapers have decided that it is time up, that they're listening to that, and they've got their headlines. Goodbye to the Hill is the back page of the Star, and it's a picture of Cluxton. Stevie Flea, tab of the morning to you. Stevie Flea is the back page of the Mirror. Farrell finally admits Dubs legend Cluxton 39 has stepped away and fears his number one may never return. That's the audio that you've heard. And Clux like the end. There's a late contender for Tab of the Morning to you, and that is from the Irish Sun. Dubs icon looks set to bow out, and Cluxton steps away. There you go, that one. And then Desi in the Dark. Desi in Dark is the males, and the door's open for Cluxton. That's the Heralds. The door's open for Cluxton. That's the headline on Colin Key's piece. The last time we had a scenario like this with anybody involved in Dublin, is he, will he, won't he, it was Diarmuid Connolly, right? Where, I mean, you could say there was a bit of Jack McCaffrey, but there was no sense that McCaffrey was coming back in the middle of the season, whereas with Connolly there was definitely fairly consistent rumours of there being contact, and they brought him back and they put him in key moments in big games very quickly when he came back. Like when Jim Gavin looked at the bench and needed cavalry, he was like, come on down, you're going to do it. Can't do that with a goalkeeper. It's a completely different scenario. It's not like you can pull off one of the outfield players and put Cluxton on. It's your number one goalkeeper who needs to have the confidence that I am the number one, because at some point I am going to face a wall of 7-foot Mayo midfielders or 12-foot Kerry forwards and midfielders, a battalion in front of me, and I need to be bulletproof that my team has my back, the movement's going to happen, the wide receivers are going to be where they're supposed to be. And can you do that if there's a constant fear about losing your place to somebody? I don't know. It's a very difficult scenario, and it's hard to see him coming back. And yet, Leinster's Leinster, they're going to cruise through it, as we've seen. Even when they're playing really badly, they're still double scores better than the teams that they're playing against.
I think for any sporting culture, Stephen Cluxton, if he comes back, has to be content, first of all, with a place on the bench. Because how can you say to Evan Comerford, we don't know what the story is with Stephen Cluxton, and for Stephen Cluxton to come back in later in the summer and he automatically takes your spot? I'm not sure does that work in that culture. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he is so revered within the camp, and maybe they know more within the camp, and that is allowed to happen. But I just struggle to see a world in which Stephen Cluxton now comes back and now gets a starting spot for the championship. Because what it would take is for him to come back in, and then for the starting keeper to have a disaster for him to come back in, and that'll take a couple of games, and it'll take really strong opposition for Evan Comerford, I think, to have a bad game, because he's a really good goalkeeper. So I don't know, like, I can see why people are now coming out and saying this is the end for Cluxton, because there are a couple of steps for him to get back into that starting jersey. Yeah. It looks like he's 40. He's going to be 40 for the start of the next championship after this one. That if he is taking a year out, that is also up against him at that point. For a man who's kept himself in such good shape and has such high standards, that is a factor. It is not like, I mean, if anybody can do it at 40, it's Stephen Cluxton, first of all. But there is also the element of, do you get off the treadmill and can you keep going? Yeah. Maybe not, but he is playing outfield then for his club, and I'm sure he's kept himself in really good shape. It's a very unusual situation. I can see why he is revered, and I can see why Stephen Cluxton gets a special rule, to be honest with you. Maybe it's not fair, but I can see why maybe he would be, it's acceptable for him to say, listen, I just don't know what I want. I can absolutely see why anybody in the world could be in that state of mind at the moment, that after a shortened off season, after an incredibly tough 16 months for everybody, I can absolutely see anyone saying I just need a break from it. But the culture of Dublin would suggest that this is still very strange, that they don't have clarity on one of their most important players.
And in a way, I know people are saying, oh, it's the most Cluxton thing of all time for him to kind of quietly slip out, but actually it's not quiet now, it's the back page headlines. It's quite un-Cluxton-esque, you know, to be at the centre of a psychodrama like this. And I don't know, I don't think you can make any bones about the fact that it is the thing that everybody's talking about in the aftermath of that game. Because when you begin to piece together the intellectual property of the players who have drifted away from the panel over the last 12 months in particular, like, that is an amazing football team that you have right there. Like a team of all-stars and players of the year and greatest ever in their position, and it's devastating pace and power, and like brain. Even just losing Cian Sullivan last week, it's like, Jesus, that's an amazing team that you'd have with Cluxton and Michael Darragh Macaulay and Mannion, and you know all the rest of the names. So I don't know. I think that Tommy's right to be giving me the chance the weekend.
I think this all plays into the wider conversation around Dublin. That I think that post-match audio from Stephen Cluxton feeds into a bad weekend. From Desi Farrell, sorry, feeds into a bad weekend for Dublin. I don't think you can make a case that Cluxton leaving is good news for Dublin. The thing is, it was going to happen eventually, and the way he looked after himself, it was probably never going to happen in a satisfying way for Dublin fans. He was probably always going to leave when he still had a lot to offer. And maybe that point is now. Maybe he does come back at some point, whether it's this year or next year. Maybe he does win another All-Ireland and is still as good as he ever was. But if this is the end, it's a blow. It's a massive blow for Dublin. It just, everything about him, coming from the base that he came from with that Dublin team of the 2000s, if we go back to that word culture, in a culture that was toxic at times, that was not conducive to winning All-Irelands, to be a central part of turning that into the best culture we've ever seen in Gaelic games, the most successful team we've ever seen in Gaelic games. That is an unspeakable level that he had got himself to and had dragged all his teammates along with him. You can't replace that. Even if he comes back in as a coach, which I think they should be fighting tooth and nail in order for him to do so at some point in the near future after he hangs up his boots. Even if he comes in as a coach, it's just not the same thing as having that guy standing over a really important kick-out when the sides are level in an All-Ireland final. It is just not the same thing. He has been through everything. He has experienced the highs and all the lows. And you just can't replicate that if you're coming into this Dublin team right now. It is a huge blow if he's gone. Yeah. They're still All-Ireland favourites. But God, it brings him back to the pack. Well,
Kerry are now 2-1. Dublin are 5-4 on. Kerry are 2-1. I don't think Kerry have been as short.
Dublin are still favourites.
Yeah, but they were unbackable favourites this time last year for 6, 7, 8, 9 in a row, and all of a sudden it's not quite 50-50, but we're trending towards it. Right, very quickly, the Ireland rugby team. We might talk about this a bit later in more detail. They're in the meh. Why only in the meh? Scored 39 points.
Yeah, the concession rate is probably a factor of why they're pulled back here a little bit. Japan, obviously, far better side than they were in the past. Ireland know all about that. Last meeting, obviously, was a complete disaster for Ireland. I think it's more to do with the fact that maybe the team looked extremely strong before the weekend, and I know the British and Irish lines didn't necessarily they were good against Japan, but Japan caused them problems. Maybe that should have been a warning before the weekend, that just because it was a strong Ireland side didn't necessarily mean a routine summer test win, and it was far from that. The side of play still looks a little bit loose. Do you want a team who can do both, or do you want a team who's got a more defined style of play? I'm not sure. I think that when you get to the next World Cup, it's going to be in France in the winter. Maybe you do want a team that can do both and can mix it up, can put the ball up the jumper and can also spread it out wide a little bit. Like that McCluskey try with the Peter O'Mahony offload was beautiful. That was silky Irish play. And then there were a couple of moments where you're like, oh, still the line out has a lot of work to do. Still in structured play, defensively, not perfect. There is still a lot of work to be done. 24 missed tackles is a very, very high number. I don't think you can make too much of an argument that this was a great or even a very good Irish performance at the weekend. The positive is that you're going to see a lot of new faces, I'd imagine, against the USA. And maybe if a lot of people would have been expecting a bit more time to see Gavin Coombs and Craig Casey at the weekend. Obviously didn't happen. But USA next up. They lost 43-29 to England at the weekend. So England also had their sort of moment of concern in their summer matchup against a so-called weaker team.
Okay, and very quickly, England and Italy are in the green. How come?
Well, England 4-0 against Ukraine. It is happening. It is happening big time. I do think, though, that maybe we've categorised England, Italy, Belgium, Spain, France, etc. into one category and then the rest into another category. So we've subconsciously maybe put Ukraine and Denmark into the same category, which is just a really bad analysis if we've subconsciously done that. I think Ukraine are a far weaker team than Denmark. I think England, quality-wise, are 4-0 better than that Ukraine side on paper. But as we all know, tournaments do not work like that. Tournaments are these strange little things that throw up shocks and throw up underperformances and overperformances, and there was a big cause on the line for Ukraine. Let's not forget, it wasn't just England who had a massive cause on the line, and England prevailed, and I think they deserve a huge amount of credit for that. The most impressive team now, gone up to #1 in the Guardian's power rankings. So this is a big moment for English football. It is coming home. And then Italy on Friday night. What an unbelievable game that was against Belgium. So tactically intriguing. Quality was pretty high. You Chiellini and Bonucci back together at the heart of the defence, and Chiellini kind of shouting at Kevin De Bruyne after he made a block saying, kick the ball harder at me. And Bonucci with his just beautiful over-the-top balls, a brilliant cat and mouse game tactically, where Italy tried to pull Belgium out of their press and then pinged a few balls over the top. You've got the tragedy of Spinazzola on the left doing his Achilles. You the doctor coming on, even in his suave blazer and his matching gloves, carrying him off the pitch, the player of the tournament, adding a layer of melancholy to this Italian story. It's going to be an entertaining semi-final, no question about it, Italy against Spain, but I think we all want to see Italy against England in the final.
All right. It's 5 minutes past 8. That is this week's performance rankings. I've got to tell you that you can kick your week off the right way and win a Gillette starter pack on today's OTB AM. Tweet @OffTheBall and tell us who you think should be in the performance rankings, and we'll announce the winner before the end of the show. David Meyler's up next.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The Football Pod with Paddy and Andy, our new weekly Gaelic football show with Paddy Andrews and Andy Moran.
You're up getting photos for the launch of some product, and I'm in there like I have a head like 50 pence and walking in.
Never do a gig with it's never going to end well.
Who walks in? It was like, you know, them slow-mos when the doors open and this Greek god just walks through the door, and I'm like...
Tom Cruise.
Like pasty white, head on me like a size 6, and it's just joy walks through. So that was a demoralising day. But
download the OTB Sports app and subscribe to the GAA podcast feed now.
First up, a Go Loud original from News Talk.
Get all the news you need to start your day with First Up, the podcast that brings you stories, analysis and interviews with the top newsmakers. First Up, available each weekday morning from 7 a.m. on Go Loud.
Subscribe to this podcast for free on the Go Loud app.
OTB AM
with Gillette. Put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
It's 6 minutes past 8 this morning. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. It's Jaron Owen with you all the way through until 10. As ever, we'd love to hear from you. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number, or better still, you can leave a comment for us on the YouTube stream and we'll talk about it. We want your opinions on the England football team, the Italians, and I mean, Spain. Everybody's kind of forgetting about them at the moment, but this is a tournament and they do have some experienced winners in their group. I'm delighted to say David Meyler is with us this morning. David, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, gents. How are we?
Yeah, football's coming home, isn't it?
It could be. It could be. You know what? After the performance against Germany, obviously going into the Ukraine game, we all expect them to beat Ukraine quite comfortably. It's probably just the way they dismantled the Ukrainians. Like for probably 80 minutes, they dominated the game. Ukraine had a period in the first half where they kept the ball well. It kind of looked like they were going to threaten a little bit, but then England, you know, they've just got everything going for them at the moment. There's a feel-good factor. Of course, look, Denmark coming up next, which is a very difficult game for them, but still feel they have probably a little bit too much for Denmark.
A lot of the things that I'm listening to from the English media are talking about the final already, which, you know, in sport has a tendency to bite you in the ass.
It does. But you know what? That's probably the biggest thing over here. Like, obviously, I'm living in England. The whole time they're getting excited. Even after the Scotland game, okay, that was the disappointment, that was the frustration. Get the result then against the Czech Republic. And then obviously the side of the draw opened up itself for England. And ever since then, they've been talking about, you know, the semi-final, final. So I kind of take it with a pinch of salt because they now are in the semis, like even before the last 16. If we, like, it was all, if we beat Germany, then we could play this, you know, winners of Sweden and Ukraine, and then it could be like the winners of the other side, which we now know is Denmark. They've been very excited the whole time, but that's the kind of noise outside of the camp. By all accounts, the noise inside the camp is one game at a time. We're obviously in a strong position. Everything is going well. I've spoken to a few of them. They're looking forward to the Denmark game. Look, they're confident. You know, clean sheet every round. They're scoring goals. Harry Kane is back scoring. As an Irishman, it's nearly a worry.
I'm disappointed, David. Like last week, you were saying that Denmark are thinking final, and now I can feel you rowing back on this a little bit. Of course, look, I've experienced games against Denmark. I think they're very good, you know, very good squad. They're very good players. Of course, the loss of Christian Eriksen is massive because he's their key man. Their squad is galvanised. It's just now they're coming up against an England team who just seem everything is going in the right direction for them. I'm just
I'm fascinated by Southgate, even like his approach to the opening game against Croatia, starting Trippier at left back, all the question marks over so many right backs. You know, everybody was trying to pick the front three. Obviously, you knew Kane was nailed on. There was question marks over Sterling. Like Jack Grealish needs to start. He's gone his own way and he doesn't listen to anyone outside of, you know, his coaching staff, the ones he well and truly trusts. Every team he's picked in every game has been right for that game. Even, you know, the whole thing of going up against Germany, if you looked at the uproar once the team was announced of playing 3 at the back of the 5 to kind of match Germany up with the wing backs, he's just got everything spot on, and it's you've got to give him credit. He's got everything correct, and you know, I won't say it's going to be easy, but I still expect England to beat Denmark.
In fairness, since we were last talking to you, those two things have happened. The Germany game has happened and the 4-0 over Ukraine. So, I mean, it is a different picture now to the England we were actually talking about last week. Can I just ask you about the midfield options then? Obviously, we might just start with Jordan Henderson. I'm not sure if you've been chatting to him in the aftermath, but 62 goals, 62 games, 1 goal for England. It's finally happened for him.
Oh, no, don't worry. I'll give him plenty of stick. I just said to him, like, I can't believe it's been that long since you've scored. Like, well, it's taken you that long to score for England. And then he tried to push it off as a holding midfielder. And I said, like, don't give me those excuses. Like, just thinks of it. Because, like, certainly a lot of the teams England play against, you know, the holding midfielders can't afford to get forward and kind of almost gamble a bit and try and get into the box because they dominate possession and you can kind of afford to be caught out of position once every now and then. Of course, he did miss the penalty not so long ago in the warm-up games. But he's got his goal, massive goal, obviously in a quarter-final of a European Championship. It's no better place, I suppose, to get started than there.
I guess when he led Liverpool to the Premier League title and obviously to the Champions League the year previous, he was this totemic leader, but he was always present on the pitch. How much more difficult is it to do that when you're an impact substitute? It's easy for us to say it here, but when you're actually the guy who's maybe not starting every game, I'm sure it's a little bit tricky.
I think with certain players it would be tricky. The personality and the type of person Jordan is, it wouldn't really affect him. Like, look, he's a great experience of being captain of Liverpool. I think he's brought a lot of that leadership into the England change room. There was obviously question marks over his fitness towards the start, and you could see various different people kind of saying you need type of fella like Jordan around. And I think, like, if you look at all the players, the way they respond to him, like, yes, Harry Kane is captain, Jordan is vice captain, but I see myself that they respect him as a captain, and I think Gareth values that leadership, not only on the pitch, but off the pitch, around the place. Look, I've spoken on several different shows of, you know, the type of character he is. So I think that part is why Gareth was so destined to have him in the squad, regardless if he had played minutes, because you can imagine, you know, off, whether it be around the hotel, his standards would be very high. He'll be dragging fellas along in training. He'll be demanding more. Like, I think we're going back. His first, like, major tournament for England was, you know, Euro 2012. I think Roy Hodgson was manager at the time. Frank Lampard got injured. I remember we were meant to go on holidays and Jordan got a phone call off the FA saying, like, you need to go. So you're going all the way back to then, and he's played in every major tournament for England. So, like, he has huge experience, and of course the success with Liverpool will only help him. He's been, you know, played in big games, played in big occasions. He's lost the Champions League final. He's won a Champions League final. That experience is vital for, you know, those younger English players. There is a lot of experience in there, but someone who's, you know, obviously been there, done it, experienced highs and experienced lows. And that's vital for a changing room.
I think he also has to be feeling that this team is on the verge of major success. If not right now, then over the next period of time, and you want to stick around, you want to get in the team. If he's fully fit and playing well, he's 100% in that team. Like, that would certainly, that's my perception of it. I don't know if Phillips and Rice have done enough to be considered the number ones after this tournament and forevermore. And I still don't think, I think if Jordan Henderson comes back and plays the way that he has done over the last 3 or 4 years, he's straight back in the side for the World Cup, which is only 18 months away. So that must be one of the other reasons why, as a player, if you're not in the team, you're not throwing your toys out of the pram at the moment. Even, I know he's not likely to under any circumstances, but you can see a future where you have a role to play.
Yeah, no, 100%. And it's the biggest thing there, Gerald, is, like, Phillips and Rice have started the opening game. They beat Croatia. Okay, they had the disappointing result against Scotland. But those two have played every game, and they've done well. And England are they're now in a European semi-final. So regardless, look, we could easily dissect each player's performance in every game, and we can highlight, good stuff, bad stuff, things we think they can do better. But inevitably, they've been rock solid. They've, formed a good partnership. There's been massive question marks over Gareth playing the two holding midfielders. Do you need it? And it's proving vital that he does need them because, look, they've kept so many clean sheets. But I think if you're one of the players and you're looking on from, the bench, whatever, you have to kind of look at your own players. And, Jordan be looking at two midfielders going, they've done well. They've been very important to the team and you have to respect that. But no doubt, him coming in off a 3-month injury, not have gotten as much game time as he'd have liked, it's going to take him 2-3 weeks to get to full match speed. And that's kind of now, obviously he came on the other day, did a large chunk of that. But it will, for him, if he wants to push for the starting place, it's going to be towards the back end of the tournament, really, isn't it? Or not the back end, back end of the year.
Can we talk a little bit about Jadon Sancho, who was a slightly unexpected starter in the game, and then I thought he played really well. I heard some people criticise his defensive mindset, as in when out of possession he doesn't do as much as some of the other players in that England team. But I thought you can see all of the skills that are right there and his ability to knit the play together, hugely important in any side. So what did you make of his performance and how well do you think he'll do for Manchester United?
I think first and foremost, I think he'll do really well for Manchester United. He's a traditional right winger. He wants to, attack a player down a fullback down the end line. He wants to get crosses in. He wants to come inside the pitch and get involved. Of course, you can highlight his defensive duties. Did he do enough to come back? But you can only judge him off, the opposition he's playing against. Ukraine never really looked like they were going to, pin England back or whatever. So a player like Sancho or a Sterling on the other side can afford to stay that bit forward and not defend as much because they're looking at, we've got the defenders, we've got the whole midfielders. If we win the ball back, I want to be in a high enough position where I can start a counter-attack. I thought he performed really well. It's very interesting. Obviously there was a lot of question marks raised. Why isn't he playing? Even when we went into the Germany game, there was a lot of the German press and media, ex-professionals who'd said, why isn't Sancho playing in this 11? Maybe Gareth had kind of kept him up because he knew what was going on in the background with this move to Manchester United. Maybe that was a small little factor because obviously then once that is kind of looks like it's done, then he brings him straight in. But I thought he did really well. It'll be interesting to see now. That's the hardest thing is what team is Gareth going to play against Denmark? Saka had obviously done really well in the games he had played in. Sancho's come in, he's done well. Kind of what way does he go now? Which players does he pick? Obviously Grealish didn't come on the other day, who was excellent against Germany. It's almost frustrating to go through it and talk to you about it because the squad depth they have and the quality they have is unbelievable. That you could you've got Luke Shaw, you've got Ben Chilwell left back, you've got Kieran Trippier, Kyle Walker, Reece James at full back. The two centre halves pick themselves. You have Rice and Phillips playing where you could afford to bring in Jordan Henderson, who's a Premier League and Champions League winner. You've got this young 18-year-old Jude Bellingham who looks exceptional. Who looks like he's going to be the pivot of England's midfield for the next 10 or 12 years once he comes of age. And then I don't even know where to start with the front three. You've got Mount who comes back in, but then you've got Saka, Sancho, Phil Foden, who there was huge talk about before the tournament. He's not featured in the last few games. It's just ridiculous.
The one thing there, David, that you didn't mention is centre forward. And I know Dominic Calvert-Lewin had an amazing season, but Kane's importance has almost gone to another level now because he's played himself into form. And maybe his importance was even greater when he wasn't in form because we saw what happens to England when he isn't great. He does seem to be the one player in a position, and it comes with being the captain as well, that you think to yourself, if he drops off again, then England might suffer or anything else like that.
Yeah, look, that's obviously a thing. Harry is disappointing in the opening games. I think he'd be the first to admit that. But like you said, he's played himself into the tournament. But it's amazing the trust that Gareth has in him. I even said before this, after the Scotland game, maybe they should take him out of the Czech Republic game and just give him a rest. They were always going to get through to the group stage or through the group stage to get into the last 16. So then he would come of age, whoever they played then. But he is probably the only nailed-on world-class player England have. I don't think there's any getting away from that. you could obviously raise question marks over a few of the other players, but Harry Kane is one of the best strikers in the world. There's no doubt in that. And I think Gareth appreciates what he does. Like, he stuck with them. He gets his goal against Germany, and then obviously he gets the 2 goals the other day. Like, how crazy is it that, okay, Schick and Ronaldo won 5 goals, but you could quite easily see Kane getting another double, against Denmark or whatever. Like, for someone who is looked off the pace, looked sluggish in the opening games, that now he's coming of form and he's really, hitting the ground running, and he looks the player that we know he can be.
How much technically better are England than Denmark?
Technique is an interesting word to use to describe them. I just think I would look at it probably as the way England have a lot more match winners. You look at the front three or the players who haven't played, they have match winners in that squad. Obviously it's a huge disappointment for Denmark. They don't have Denmark, who is that excellent player. Denmark seem to have a great togetherness. They have very good players, don't get me wrong, but they all pull together and they kind of grind out results time after time. If you looked at the goal that Dolberg got the other day of the interlink passing, get down the wing, and then Meyler crosses it in. They just have a very good balance, very good players who are, of course, are playing across the top leagues in Europe. But I just feel England have more probably star-studded quality in the terms of you've got a match winner in Sterling, you've got a match winner in Kane, you've got a match winner in Mount, Foden, Saka, Grealish. The list goes on. So I think that's probably what separates them. It's just now about England. Can they deal with the atmosphere, going back to Wembley? I thought it was very interesting listening to Gareth speak about, he was actually excited that they were leaving Wembley after the Germany game to go to Rome for the Ukrainian game, just because he said the atmosphere won't live up. It can't be as good as it was at Germany. So it's nice for us to take a step out, obviously get the results on, so they go back. So now there's a massive feel-good factor for England. Look, you're not going to get a better opportunity playing at home at Wembley against Denmark, a team that you should beat. Denmark, they beat them in the Nations League. But simple fact is everything is kind of pulling in their direction.
If England win then, who don't they want to see on the other side of the draw?
I simply said I expect England to win. I think they don't want to play Italy. I think if they played Spain, they'd beat Spain. It's just something. Now, I know I tipped Italy from the start. Jer's probably smiling away there, thinking to get him on singing. But it's just something about the Italians. Certainly the way, we all tweet about it, we all talk about it. The way they celebrate blocks or tackles or giving up a corner to stop a counter-attack, and it's just something special about the Italian group. It's probably the first major tournament in, the best part of 30 years where they've not had an outright number 10, whether it be Roberto Baggio, Del Piero, Totti. People will be quick to say at the start of the tournament they're missing that kind of creative spark, but they've just got something good going on. Now, obviously, they've got a deal. Spinazzola's out, I believe, for 5 to 6 months after snapping his Achilles. That's a huge loss because his partnership with Insigne is crucial, because he overlaps and can get involved in attacks. Insigne can come inside like we've seen with the goal against Belgium. But he creates that width. What Mancini's going to do with that, I don't know. But if Italy play England, Italy are the masters of, the dark arts and defending. Can you imagine Cellini and Bonucci will be kicking lumps out of Harry Kane when the ball's up the other end of the pitch. They're brilliant at it. And I love watching them play.
Yeah, it's a performance art, really, isn't it? The shithousery, those last 15 minutes on Friday night, was just beautiful, David.
Yeah, it is. And I get it. People are moaning. The prime example is Immobile, the goal for Barella's goal. He's rolling around on the floor crying, I've been kicked, and then they score and he jumps up. They're just, it's part and parcel of football, and they are the masters of it. Everything for Verratti with his little, he picked up a yellow card after about 10 minutes. I was sitting there watching the game, screaming at the telly, going, will you relax and stop trying to, tackle people? But he's sliding. They just have a way of, they get up and they kind of sorry ref. And they just get away with so much. like you said, they're the masters of it.
Who's the best midfielder in that Italian team?
Oh, Verratti, every day of the week.
But in the context of this tournament, even, like, I suppose considering he came in late, is he still the guy after the late arrival as such that is still standing out for you?
Well, in this tournament, I'd probably lean towards Jorginho for the Italian side. Look, we've seen it with Chelsea, the way he is very one pace, but it's about the control that he brings in, his distribution of his passing, getting on the ball, getting the ball off the back four, knocking it wide, getting it back. He can take the sting out of a game. I think he's crucial for the way Italy play. Now, you've got to give a mention to Barella, who scored the other night, Locatelli, who came in, who's got a couple of goals. We've just got a great mix and blend of different players. But, like, if you were to hang your hat on one of them, like, Verratti is special. Like, I'm in awe of watching him. Like, I remember years ago I played against Italy in Craven Cottage, and I remember Martin O'Neill was screaming at me to press him because he was, the centre-halves had split and he was getting the ball off the goalkeeper. And he took it on the back foot and he shaped me up. And he came dribbling at me, and I was there thinking, like, not many holding midfielders I played against in my career would have the audacity to take the ball off the goalkeeper. Like, if I had one possession off him, I'm inevitably through one-on-one. Yes, the two centre-halves will be scrambling back to get me. He just did two step overs and dropped the shoulder and went past me. And I was there thinking, like, wow, like, the ball's on you to even attempt that. And it's just the way he plays and the confidence. And he's an exceptional midfielder.
And I hope you turned around and kicked him up the hole, did you?
Oh, I had a cut off him about 15 minutes later. Yeah, don't worry about that. Yeah.
No. And still he probably did it again.
Yeah, but that's the beauty. That's what the best players do. They just go and go again. Nothing phases them. They don't shirk the challenge of going, getting on the ball. Like, that's their job, is kind of, to be the one that everything goes through, whether you're starting an attack or if you're, lost the ball and you're transitioning into defend. You need to be able to, do whatever. And Verratti has all of that. We'll talk about Spain again in a second, but the Belgians have once again failed to live up to their talent and the hype and just that sense that this is a team that needs to win a tournament to frank its greatness, and they haven't done it. So have they underachieved? Is there something about Roberto Martinez that just is stopping them reaching what they're capable of? Or is it, again, in a tournament, you need a bit of luck, and De Bruyne really was carrying an injury and was not his full self. Hazard didn't make it, and they don't have the luck that other teams have had. You do need a certain amount of luck. Like Belgium, there's no way you can say that it's not been a disappointment, because the array of talent they have, Lukaku, fresh off the season he's had, De Bruyne, Hazard, like, even, the massive question marks I've always had about the Belgians is their back three. Vermaelen, Vertonghen, Alderweireld. It doesn't exactly, they are very good players. I'm not for a second saying they're not, but it doesn't scream confidence as like I'd have more confidence in Maguire, Stones, Walker and Shaw. I'd have more in, Bonucci, Cellini, Spinazzola, that, those, there's just more to them. Like, we've seen that. Okay, Vertonghen and Alderweireld had a fantastic year a few years ago. Do you remember when Tottenham kept so many clean sheets and they had this massive partnership, but that faded off? And then Vermaelen, who's been, was very good for Arsenal at once upon a time, but he's been struck with injuries, and kind of even the whole thing of Witsel, like, it's remarkable what Witsel has done to consider he was out for such a large period of time and missed so much football to kind of come back in. He didn't play in the opening games, but to come back in the, the next few games, just very difficult. And they're really relying on the firepower up front to kind of get them through. And like you said there, De Bruyne, he's got an ankle ligament injury and he's playing in the game. And like, even him coming out after, like, that's where Martinez needs to be big enough and bold enough to go, look, Kevin, I would love you to play. You get into any team in the world, but it's probably best we give you the last 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Try and make a quick impact as opposed to playing the full game. Certainly against an Italian team who will be kicking you, biting you and doing all sorts to you just to upset the rhythm of the Belgian team. But on the open, that game was very open. There were chances for Belgium, but it's another tournament, like you said, they've gone by in this golden generation and failed again.
What about Spain? Are we underrating Spain because they come through on penalties against a side that was unfancied? Or, the history is littered with tournament winners who get a narrow escape after a horrific penalty shootout?
I did write Spain off. I was on with JD on Saturday a few weeks ago, and I said, I don't think Spain will win it. I still think Italy will beat Spain. I might be wrong. I might beat my words this time next week, but I just feel that there's something missing with Spain. I don't know what it is. They can dominate possession. All right, look, on the last game, they were disappointed. In the previous 2 games, they'd scored a load of goals. They'd 5 in both, albeit one was in extra time. But it's just, I don't know what it is. Can you imagine the Italians, the way they play? I've mentioned the centre-halves enough this morning, but they played with Morata at Juventus. They'll know exactly how to deal with him. There's almost a soft touch with the Spanish squad. They do dictate possession. They do try and control a game. But there's a lot of ability about the Italians going forward and whatever. So I think they'll cause Spain problems. And then it's whether or not Spain can deal with it. I think it was the Croatia game with Spain. It was just a prime example of Spain were comfortable, knocking the ball around. This is nice and easy. And then, Croatia kind of went, you know what? Let's just go and try and bully them. Let's just hit long balls up, get round, the players. There was some crazy stat. Laporte won 1 out of 30 of his aerial challenges. He just kind of got bullied, and it only went to the winning extra time. That imagine somebody might have been, Luis Enrique or Busquets kind of said, everyone slow down, let's go back to doing what we know and, have balls to almost take the football and kind of keep playing, which they did, and that's where they got through the tie. But I think the Italian team will know that. They'll go after them and they'll try and bully them. Certainly with the way the Italians press, they try and press for large amounts of each half, which is unbelievable. You think of the amount of games some of these players have played, but they go after teams, and I think they'll go after Spain. They'll just have too much for them. All
right. I hope you're doing your vocal exercises. It's difficult to
well, I'm tipping Italy and England.
It's still on.
And then whether or not England, it's either coming home or it's time to say goodbye. But we'll see.
Oh, I can't wait. David, good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
David Meyler giving us his thoughts there. OTB AM brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Loads of stuff for us to talk about later on in the show. We're going to be talking Gaelic football with Kyle Coney. We're going to be talking hurling with James Skehill. And look, I mean, everybody is having their say at the moment on the comments about the refereeing decision that James Owen made to give away or to award the penalty on the sin bin. The idea of the rule is good, but you want to be Nostradamus to predict what a scoring opportunity is. That's Analysis and Coaching is the handle on YouTube. Shifty Lad says, maybe the ref doesn't agree with the rules, but he has to implement them, a bit like giving out to a waitress instead of the owner. Issel Cody says, James Owens could have mitigated matters with a 2-second conversation with his linesman. Maybe, but maybe the linesman says, well, the rule's the rule. What can I say? Regardless of the bad decision, Clare had enough time to react and change tactics, and they didn't, says Colm. The umpires could have stepped in for the Clare penalty, says Tig. But again, what are the umpires going to say? Yeah, the lads are running away from goal, so actually he's there and he's clean through. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, they can only say what they saw, and it's I thought that the defenders were brought outside the 21 and he was inside the 21, and it's that's good enough for me to award a scoring opportunity. The thing is, the comment there about needing to be Nostradamus to predict a scoring opportunity. Football's in a position, soccer is in a position where the clean through goal scoring opportunity seems to work pretty well. Maybe you have a few grey areas, but you never have anything on the level of yesterday's outrage from hurling. If a player was that wide on a soccer pitch, was going down the wing, cutting in, and then got fouled like that, it's probably not the professional foul. It probably doesn't cross that line. It seems that line is more defined, and maybe it'll just take a period of time for this to be more defined in Gaelic games.
Yeah, except that you are obviously, it is easier to score goals in hurling than it is in soccer.
That is a very good point. It does take maybe an extra 7 to 10 steps, and he's then in goal scoring opportunity. The angle will be acute, but it's the conversation with he's definitely going to take just a little bit more time just to cool the jets just a small bit. But then maybe you're making a decision based on what you think the reaction might be, rather than making a decision based on what you believe the decision to be. And you're the man in the middle. I think that if you're going to make that significant a decision, it's not necessarily something you do in a rash manner. I think if somebody's been refereeing that long, you'd want to be pretty confident of it when you're doing things that quickly. So I'd say he was actually just quite confident of it, and I'd say he probably, if you asked him there and then to stand over it, I'd say he would have.
And it'd be good to hear what he has to say today, but we don't really get that. Very quickly, the headlines are all about Stephen Cluxton in most of the papers. Doors open for Cluxton is the Herald, the Mail is Desi in dark. And then Rory McIlroy is saying the Irish Open needs a calendar change. He's suggesting that maybe the week after the British Open would be the week for it. And tab of the morning, Clux like the end. Dubs icon looks set to bow out is the back of the sun. And then there was another one. Oh, where's the other tab of the morning to you? Stevie Flea is the back of the Mirror. So that's what they have decided. Goodbye to the Hill, question mark. Goodbye to the Hill, says the Irish Daily Star for you this morning. It is 8:35. Let's move on. We want to talk rugby, and I'm delighted to say Lynne Cantwell is with us, South Africa Women's High Performance Director. Lynne, good morning to you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
And what part of the world are you in?
Oh God, yeah, I'm still stuck. Haven't got to South Africa yet. Still waiting on visa, so kind of email watching and phone watching at the moment.
How is the new gig going then?
Yeah, look, it's really, really good. It's great. There's so much work to do, which is great. But there's a massive willingness for change and a willingness to want to support and help. So that's great. I think I'm just kind of managing volume and how to prioritise what we need to do. But logistically, they're like South Africa are obviously still, from an office point of view, still working from home. So a lot of that stuff is still possible. And if anything, because it's such a big country, being able to work virtually is helping being able to connect with people in all of the different provinces, because there's 14 different provinces. So we obviously have to work through the provinces to get work done in the game. So yeah, lots of work being done and plenty more to do. But I think until I get there, I won't get a real sense of what I'm missing by not being there, but that will happen. In
terms of the playing population, what are the numbers like for the women's game in South Africa?
Yeah, it's a bit mad. Like our numbers are actually very similar to Ireland, which is crazy for a population of 80 million. So there's probably only about kind of 3,000, 4,000 adult players, but there's 10, 20,000 younger girls playing. And I think that the model, it's really interesting. I think the models that by which you kind of foresee and operate on, being from Europe or from Ireland, you just make a lot of assumptions that it's going to be the same in other countries. And I think what you see over there, because there's just such a high volume of population, is that I think how we approach things are going to be very, very different. So I think, for example, yes, there's 3,000, 4,000 adult players, but relatively not a huge amount of investment in the game so far. But what you'd imagine you'll see is those numbers skyrocketing over the next couple of years, fingers crossed. And that's not just like the stuff that we're doing, but it'll be if you can increase accessibility of rugby on the ground in the communities, in the provinces, I think the take-up will be just way bigger, because rugby is seen over there as just like a royal sport, and it's something that everybody wants to get involved in. So if the girls aren't being involved in it, it's more just it's not accessible, as opposed to they don't want to, So I think once we open the door, I'd imagine that we'll get a high volume of players. And I think what I seem to see happening in the men's structures, and although they have just an incredibly, amazingly robust kind of high school system that encourages so many boys to players, which kind of drives performance. So what you see is that the numbers itself drives performance at the top, as opposed to, other things that we need in other countries. So I'm hoping is that when we get more players into the game, that will kind of just self-generate performance at the top. And yeah, but there's a good bit of work to do before that happens.
Are there lessons that you're looking at other rugby systems around the world and saying a bit of this will apply here and a bit of this won't, but some of this over here will apply?
Yeah, like I actually did a kind of competitor analysis around the world, and I think the one things that you look to is obviously geography. So your Australias, your Americas, you can compare because they're similar sized countries, etc. And there's some learnings there. Definitely America in the size of how far people have to travel to come to camps, etc. But I think the one thing that is unique to South Africa is the combination of economics, politics, society. So in a way, you're picking on other countries' models and trying to kind of create a bespoke approach. And I think for me, the one thing I've said from the get-go is that I can bring international experience and kind of women's sport context and the research that we know so far in in that kind of emerging topic, which is really important. But like I need them to translate it into a South African context culturally, because obviously I don't know that. So I think that's a nice collaboration and it's kind of working well. But there's some funny things that are happening, like even in the women in leadership space, which obviously we do lots of work in. I think the assumptions of what we see in our country, in Ireland or the UK, in Europe, as to kind of what holds kind of women in leadership back. Often they're things, yes, around structure, and this is how we used to do things, a lack of understanding of like how we represent sport at the moment, but also things like, you know, family commitments and, yes, the role of women in society, all of those things. Whereas I think what we're seeing in South Africa is quite different, is that there's a massive... Structurally, I think there's just so little there, but there's a huge will and the want of women to say, I can do this, I want to do this, just put me there. So I think we're seeing different insights over there as to what would hold kind of women in leadership back, or I'm sure you can apply those insights to other sectors. They relate very closely, but they're not the same as what we see in other countries, which I suppose is what you'd expect.
Yeah, everything is always local in the end. Can you talk a little bit though about the situation in Ireland and are we getting better at removing any of those barriers that we have traditionally put up in Irish sport to getting more women involved in leadership roles?
Are we getting better? Yeah, look, I think like this is very easy to focus on the ones that are not, and there's definitely some that are not still, but there's definitely a lot that are. We are getting better. I think we understand the context more. I think we understand this principle around, like if we're talking about leadership, we're talking about boards and senior management or coaching positions, for example. That's usually how we're kind of defining leadership at the moment within this kind of progressive space. And when we definitely recognise that there's a need, we recognise that boards, for example, should represent society as opposed to just the people in the sport. So if you have 10 men on a board, for example, and no women or one woman, you know, you're representing your sport very well, but that sport is just for guys. It's not representing society. And you can imagine if we had an equally represented board, and you can imagine what your sport could look like. And I think that's what like golf have taken really good steps towards, etc. And we're just talking about gender, obviously, but we're not talking about obviously other minorities or other cohorts, for example. So this is where the diversity and inclusive debate comes in. So I think we're getting better at the understanding. But I think structurally, I think is a huge problem still, because a lot of our sports are governed and structured in a very complicated way. So it's very hard. You have to do a certain thing to get on that club committee, and then do a certain thing to get on that provincial committee, and then do a certain thing to get up to that presidential committee, for example. And that's deeply, deeply embedded and systemic and complicated. And to try and even start for females to flow through to that system is just really hard. So I think when you go into that depth, which is the reality in some of the sports, I think that's really harder. And I think that's where you have to start looking to policy and to higher level things to say, look, it's just not acceptable. Because if we continued at the rate that we're going, we wouldn't have any form of 40% of board representation until 2065, you know, or is that okay? Are we going to wait till 2065 where our sports are equal? And I think what we're not saying is just equal from a gender point of view. What we're saying is like a well-governed sport is a diverse board, and governance governs all. So our sport in general will do better if we have a more diverse board. So I think men's sports will do an awful lot better if we have better decision making and better representation at a board level. So let's hope that we'll get there soon.
So coupling the funding, the government funding, with the requirement to be more diverse is the only way out of this. If you look at how quickly the FAI changed their structures, it was very painful for them to do so, and a lot of members in the FAI didn't think they should do it or shouldn't be forced to do it, but they had to do it because they needed the government bailout. And all of a sudden a bunch of non-executive directors are on the board, and suddenly the board looks like it's more diverse, and let's wait and see. Hopefully it's successful, and we wish them all the best. But the other sports organisations who aren't in moments of crisis and don't quite, I mean, they are all now obviously because of COVID, but they have their hand out to the government, and the government's kind of like, yeah, here's the money. You should do a bit better on the diversity thing. You haven't done as well as you could. Okay, don't worry. Here's the money anyway. We need to be a bit more militant about it, right?
Yeah, look, I definitely support that. So one of the big things that Sport Ireland are doing and pushing really, really hard on, and it's very zero tolerance as to the deadlines that the sports reach, is this governance code. So governance code is a code by which all sports and charities in Ireland should operate, and within that there's an expectation of lots of things and how you operate, but definitely from like a gender and a diverse board. So the expectation is for all sports to align to that by the end of this year. Now, at the same time, that's still a little bit lighter touch than what we're saying, which is, you should attach funding to how you govern your sports. Now, I'm definitely pro that. And I'm definitely pro, like, there's a great debate around quotas and etc. I think I'm pro that now, because I just see that if you don't do it, then people don't move and the accountability is not there. So, and I think on the argument of healthy governance, like if we go down that route and say, if diversity and inclusive boards are a reflection of you governing, as in how you govern your organization and how you make business decisions and how you operate progressively into the future, if that's a reflection of a diverse board, then I think we really need to look to being stricter in our expectations of the sports, because there's I think 11, 12 sports from a female representation point of view that are still below 10%, and if worse, like 8% and 4%. Like I have zero tolerance around that, because I think that yes, it's poor from a gender point of view, but what else does that reflect in your sport? And I'd be very hopeful that we'd be able to take stronger steps towards making that change.
I know you've yet to fly down there yet, Lynne, but I presume that this will be really interesting from a South African standpoint as well, to see the work that they've done when it comes to diversity on a political level, and seeing how that's actually dripping down into sport in general and into rugby union in general. Yeah, look, it's really, really fascinating. So South Africa are on have a government mandate towards transformation, and obviously formally that's racial transformation. But I think what you see from a diversity point of view is a massive understanding of how important it is for us to progress in our society to reflect the reality of our society. And when you look at it through that lens, that's when you look to, how we're operating at the moment, most certainly kind of privileges and fortunes a certain cohort, and look at all of these other cohorts that we're not representing. So I think what's exciting about South Africa is all that they're faced with lots of other things with regard to kind of political and societal and economic challenges that we wouldn't have in other countries. At a kind of behavioural society level and humanist level, there's a massive buy-in to change and progress and equality. And that's not to say that there's not a million ways to do that is easier. Is policy or progress in leadership or coaching or pathways or commercial partners, for example. There's a complete yes, we need to do that. And I like we speak about in Ireland and Sport Ireland, from women in sport point of view, we speak about this ecosystem, this tapestry of an approach that we're trying to make, in that the women in sport policy will focus on those four key pillars, and yes, they're a priority, and yes, they're key from a strategy and a policy change type of thing, but there's so much other good work that needs to be done, and like the 20 by 20 campaign demonstrated that, and just like the all of the work being done with the LGFA and the camogie, the ladies camogie, with regard to balance there. So that's all really, really important. And in South Africa, you find that too, is that everybody just sees the inequality in lots of the things of how they operate. So there's a massive willingness to want to change. But the challenge is, I think over there, a lot of it, if it's finance, a lot of it is reliant on the government for finance, which can only go so far. And as a result, they look very, very strongly to private sponsorship. And like from a female sports point of view, the female sports like cricket, hockey, the ones that have done well are often the ones that have been connected with a big sponsor. So that's something that we're working hard on, is like, how do we create the identity of women's rugby? How do we position that in society over there, in a place whereby sponsors want to connect? So I'd feel hopeful that we'll try to get something over the line this year. And I think one of the challenges that we have there from a female point of view is that although rugby is a gospel sport, and definitely a reflection of what society, what a multicultural society can do on the rugby pitch from a performance point of view, and the women's game isn't positioned there yet, and it represents a very different demographic too. So what we're trying to do is position women's rugby over there as a sport where girls can really connect to and see that, this is a sport that I can go to be safe. This is a sport that I can go to be welcome and valued. This is a sport that I can go to be encouraged
think for myself and grow myself as a woman and as a player, and then hopefully achieve the aspirations. And this is a sport that I can be equally respected in, like the guys are. And I think once you get that type of support behind you in a society that just loves rugby, I'd be really hopeful that we can really take it somewhere special.
Is it too simplistic to suggest that if the British and Irish Lions were to ever have a women's tour, that would be automatically beneficial for South Africa?
Yeah, like I know this debate is going around at the moment, and I know lots of my rugby community actually aren't in favour of it. They just don't think that the model that the Lions use can be naturally copied and pasted onto the guys, and like that's often the case. But I'm actually pro it. I'm not saying that South Africa are ready for it at all. I do think New Zealand can make it work. I think Australia could make it work. It might just need to be a little bit different. I'd imagine in 2025 South Africa would be a better place to have it, even though I think the Lions tour would probably shift. It would. I don't know if it'd be on the same year as the guys. So maybe they'd be ready for it sooner than that. But like I do, like I'm pro women's tour for the Lions. I think it'd be cracking.
And who do you get to cheer for then when the Lions are playing South Africa now that you're working for South Africa?
Yeah, you know what? Like, it's really interesting. I absolutely love Irish rugby. Like, I love and adore it. And even I'm packing up at the moment, and I've been looking yesterday at all of just the jerseys that I've picked up over the years. And you're going to hold them on. You hold on to them because you want to give them to your daughter or your son or something like that. And you just kind of go through this like mad memory lane, and it's just wonderful. At the same time, what I love also is sports that like really engage and want to grow all sport, so I think from a South Africa point of view, I really respect what they're trying to do in the women's game, and I actually have been welcomed so much, and I think I've been really taken aback by how accessible everybody is and how much they want to grow the women's game, but just want me to be part of the team. Like I've sat in analysis sessions with the Springboks, and I'm there with decision-making processes around kind of elite coach development for the men and the women too. So I think I see it in a different lens now, and I see how rugby can operate and sport can operate, and it doesn't have to be a man-woman thing, and I really respect that. So I think I'm supporting the Springboks because I think they're a great bunch, and then obviously the Lions I'm supporting too. But like I'm a complete rugby romantic when it comes to that too. So you're like, get off my screen, pick a side. But yeah, like it's just going to be a good tour.
I get it. That's they're very you like everybody at the moment, and that's fine. That's totally allowed. You're one of the few people in the world who's going to get away with one of those half and half jerseys for once. Thanks a million for joining us, and best of luck. It's a really fascinating story. Thanks a million.
No worries. See you then. Bye-bye.
It's Lynne Cantwell giving us an update on a load of stuff and how things are going. So hopefully some food for thought for you out there this morning. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. It's 8:52. OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. I should tell you about this, of course. We are broadcasting all of the matches from the British and Irish Lions tour of South Africa on Off the Ball. It continued with Saturday's warm-up game against the Emirates Lions and continues this Wednesday with the game against the Cell Sea Sharks. Our coverage will be brought to you in association with Vodafone, lead partner of the British and Irish Lions. A couple of quick comments for you. Cluxton won't be back this year. Farrell doesn't even know what the story is, says Alan. I think Desi knows what the story is. I think like no manager gives you the full chapter and verse for everything that's going on. And is there a possibility he's taking a year out and comes back on?
Yeah.
You floated that boat a little earlier and you thought that maybe you think that might be realistic?
I think that if somebody's ever going to take a year out this late in their career and come back at the age of 40, Stephen Cluxton's going to be that guy. He has completely thrown out the perceived wisdom with a lot of things that we thought to be true when it comes to GAA, to be honest. So you can't write anything off in this scenario. I think we are getting close to the point where 2021 is going to be very hard for him to be a starter in this Dublin team. And I think in fairness, if you're looking at what Desi Farrell is saying yesterday, you don't even need to read between the lines to see that he is really pushing home that he's not going to play this year. Like it's 8 weeks between now and the end of the season, really. So it would be, well, then again, like as I just said, he has defied a number of other things. Could he defy a whole 8 weeks, and he's training as an outfield player with his club and all that? Who knows?
Kyle Coney is with us this morning to parse the weekend's big stories. We thought that maybe Galway beating Roscommon was going to be the biggest story of the weekend, but is it actually a bigger story that Stephen Cluxton has stepped away at the moment, Kyle?
Absolutely. I suppose going by Desi last night or yesterday after the game, we sort of were hoping for a bit more closure on the situation, but I suppose things is really up in the air. Nobody seems to know what's happening. Stephen obviously doesn't know himself whether he wants to rejoin the fold or not. Maybe the hunger with him is maybe not there, or maybe just genuinely doesn't know. But at this stage, as you're saying there, the championship's only 8 weeks long. He's going to have to know within a very short space of time. I suppose with with Dublin out again in a couple of weeks, that question's going to arise again because the closure wasn't there. Desi come out and says, we don't know. And when you say you don't know, the question's going to arise again. And
when will you know? Yeah.
When will you know? When will we know? It's going to be the question on everyone's lips. Well, what's the story? Because, we know how important Stephen is to Dublin. You move and he'll find you. So he's vital to every single restart that obviously the Dublin have. He sets every score up. Realistically, he's the man who starts it all. And he's probably their most influential player and their most important player. And it'll be interesting to see what the story is. I know it puts an awful lot of pressure on Evan Comerford. So things are very much up in the air with Stephen.
We've been talking about this now really since last year's All-Ireland final about the quality of player who has left and retired. And obviously none of them were still first team nailed on starters with the exception of Cluxton. And Cluxton hasn't officially retired, but he's definitely stepped away, right? You can't take all of that brain power out of the culture and the training week in, week out and still be the same team, surely.
I would agree with that now. You see a lot of, you've Cian O'Sullivan left, retired, Stephen Cluxton, Paddy Andrews. So you take an awful lot of big names out. You take an awful lot of All-Ireland medals out, an awful lot of experience, an awful lot of miles in the legs, people who have been in situations where some of the players haven't been. I watched the highlights of the Dublin game last night. Although I agree with some people say Dublin are training for an All-Ireland semi-final. The stutter through that game yesterday. But I do believe that, this Dublin team's probably more beatable than they were a few years ago. I think that this is the chance now where other teams can close the gap. The Kerrys, the Mayos, Tyrone, even Donegal. Now is the chance where, they have players coming in, just probably not at the same calibre of the players that have been replacing them previously. And I do think that they're more catchable now than they have been. They're more open. 15-7 yesterday. People can say it's a league game or it's a championship game that they're stuttering their way through. But previously we would have seen them blow teams away and rack up big scores. Can't mind the last time I've seen Dublin not scoring a goal.
Is there a sense when you say they're more beatable now that there is a sort of now or never aspect to catching the dubs, whereby you'll have a goalkeeper who steps into the void left behind by Stephen Cluxton, and over a period of time he too might also build up the aura of Stephen Cluxton? This year it feels that there are a number of question marks around things like that aura and around the influence that some of those players have. That you kind of need to beat them this year if it's going to happen anytime soon.
I think I mind hearing something like that last year, the whole COVID situation where, last year was the year because they're not going to get the preparation, they're not going to get the time together. Because I was listening to Paddy Andrews a while back, and he was saying that they spent hours of conversation of listening till, talking off the pitch about where they're going to be. You can't hear each other in front of 82,000 people in Croke Park, so they're getting that sense of communication off the pitch where James McCarthy went forward, Cian O'Sullivan dropped in. But I would agree with that in terms of it's sort of, they have a chance now. Teams have a chance now, I feel, as if they can close the gap. They have a chance with the likes of them boys out. The calibre of player, I just don't think, maybe they'll turn out to be that way, but at the minute I don't think they're the same level as they previously have been. Stephen Cluxton is massive till that, and I have always been ranting and raving about, I actually don't think Dublin have a real clear kick-out strategy. I think Stephen's plan is, you move and I'll find you. That's how good he is.
That's why I was saying this a little bit earlier on. I think you can't bring him back in later on in the championship easily. If he rejoins the panel, he's rejoining as a sub, because like, what does it say to the rest of the team that, okay, he gets grandfather straight back in, and you can't bring a goalkeeper on and off in a game, really. You're starting, you know, unless there's an injury, essentially, you're not subbing off a goalkeeper if he has 2 bad kickouts or concedes a goal.
Yeah, you're not going to bring him back in and start him, because I think that demoralises the team. I think that demoralises the whole point of the unit. What Dublin will be pushing is, this is a team. It's the same as everyone. You know, this is a team effort. You put in the effort. Everyone puts in the same amount of effort. You put in the extra hours. Here, that Stephen was doing 1 or 2 sessions with the goalkeeping coach, but he's back with his club. So I can't see him being brought back in. I can't see him come back in and starting. If things were a normal season, you know, you could probably give him 2 or 3 games in the Leinster Championship to see, you know, where he's at or when he was coming back. But with 8 weeks, it's a short space of time. And personally, I don't see him coming back. And I think it would demoralise the whole group if he came back and he was to be given a starting jersey.
So when you talk about the kick-out routine and you're thinking there that it's just you move and I'll find you, are other counties then thinking about kick-outs even more than Dublin, even though Dublin have it nailed down a little bit more?
Well, go back to that kick-out in the All-Ireland final where Jack McCaffrey, that was a kick-out that's a kick-out routine. You can see it, and we have seen it numerous times, and we've seen numerous clips of the ball being broke, Jack McCaffrey starting his run just below the 45 and then ultimately end up finishing it in the net. But I think on a general basis, you know, Dublin have just, you move, we'll get to a certain area of the pitch, you move and I'll find you. I think other teams probably do put an awful lot of emphasis on kickouts and know the Tyrone. We put a serious amount of emphasis on the kickout and what we would do after a certain score or what we would do after a certain play, what kickout we would go till. And I think teams sometimes overthink it. They do, and I don't think Dublin do. I think they just have that many. Dublin have that many players who want the ball. Other teams probably don't have that many players who want the ball. Their cornerbacks are easily as comfortable as their half forwards, and I think that's what makes them so good.
Can we maybe talk about some of the other games across the course of the weekend? You were at the Armagh Antrim game, and we'd Enda McGinley on at the start of the year, and he was wondering like what the evolution of the style of football that Antrim are going to, how they were going to play, and he said like there's a debate, you know, come championship time, should we go back to being a batten down the hatches team, or are we trying to get the players enthusiastic about being attacking and playing football? And like for a while yesterday, they were giving it to Armagh, and I don't think anybody expected them to give it to Armagh, but 4 goals between the 2 teams in the end, that's the difference between essentially a Division 1 team and now a Division 3 team.
Yeah, I was at the game yesterday and it was full credit to Antrim. They kept the ball for 3 minutes, 15 seconds for their first score that came of a free kick. They were the better side for about 40, 45 minutes. They were really, really patient with their build-up. They worked the wings really, really well. Mick McCann was sort of operating as a pivot man, sort of just in around the middle of the field. They were patient in their build-up. They worked the ball really well, and they were punching holes in Armagh, and any time they got through, it was either a free kick or it was a good score from the pocket. Nan Kiever kicked a brilliant score. Gordon Eastwood kicked a couple of great scores, but the conditioning level let them down. You know, in the second half, I was expecting a bigger kick out of them in the second half, the game really to come to life, but it never really materialised. I know Armagh got a penalty. It's probably killed the game off, and that left it too much for them to do. But the conditioning level probably between a Division 1 team and a Division 3 team now, that kicked into play, I would say, from about 40, 45 minutes on, and Armagh just looked the better side.
How much better Armagh this year than they were last year when we thought that they were going to give Donegal a real rattle and then didn't?
Armagh, I was actually a bit disappointed in Armagh yesterday because I'd seen them a few times in the league and seen their last league game against Donegal, and I was really impressed with them. I thought they were moving the ball really, really well. I thought their forwards were operating on a different level that they have been. Yesterday they seemed sloppy, they seemed leggy. Maybe that was down to them sort of seeing that the game as a foregone conclusion and getting themselves lined up for Monaghan in a fortnight's time. But in the league, they were really, really impressive. I thought they were the kick of a ball away from getting into a league semi-final. Their game finished 1-16 apiece against Donegal. So I think if they get back to that level, I know Aidan Falker was suspended yesterday. He'll be a help to their team, and I think they need to get more cohesion at the back. I think, as I said before, they don't seem to have a settled defence. I would see the defence changing again with Aidan Falker coming back in the next day. So they've improved from last year, but they need to improve in big games. You know, the championship games is where it's going to count for Kieran McGinney's men. I think that Kieran Donaghy bringing a new element to them. I know that they tried long high ball in yesterday, and it didn't work for the first 20 minutes. They put Charlie Ogue and Rian O'Neill in there, but they were launching the ball from 80 metres away, and it was impossible to catch it. You know, it was coming from an awful distance, and if they had caught it, Armagh Antrim had plenty of people around the break, so they'll need to look at a different game plan for Monaghan.
Like, how quickly can that change of plan take place? Like, is that the type of thing that a couple of championship games in, everybody realises this is how it's supposed to work? In training this week, they identify you're doing that from too far out, have one more pass, work the ball up, make that transition be a little bit further down the pitch and then try it? Or, like, is that just the type of thing that, you know, they were massive favourites for that game, on a bit of a hide into nothing, you safely navigate it, and then from that position of having won the match, you actually get to have the analysis afterwards?
Yeah, as you said, it's probably a no-win situation for them. Run up, although it did finish with a healthy scoreline between the two of them. You know, play really, really well, win by 15, 16 points. Everyone saying that was what was expected. But as you did say, they're launching the ball from, you know, Rian O'Neill was in full forward along with Charlie Ogue. Oisín was kicking the ball from behind his half-back line, trying to launch it in. I think there's one more pass in them. I think it's to get it to the middle of the field to run round Jamar Hall, Niall Grimley. And there was an awful lot of room in there for them two boys. I think if they had one bounce ball in front, they had acres and acres of room where they had the beating of the defenders. That's something that they'll have to look at, because Monaghan will sweep that up as well, you know. So they'll make the transition in training. I would suspect that they'll see that in the video work where they're trying to drive the ball from too long and work one more pass, get it inside. And they have brilliant forwards. Stephen Campbell didn't take off yesterday, who had been exceptional in the league, but he played a lovely ball in for Rory Grugan's goal, and he could have had another one, Rory. So they have the forwards to hurt teams. They'll make that transition in training this week, and I fully expect a different type of game against Monaghan.
Yeah, and the next round of Ulster Championship games are absolutely brilliant looking at the moment. Just on Galway versus Roscommon then, Kyle. Roscommon, I guess, have been a pretty entertaining team to watch over the last little while. They've got their hands on a Connacht championship. They've done pretty well. I think Kevin McStay was on the show saying that they came close to maxing out what they had. Have they started to go the other way a little bit? Like, I know they brought Stephen Poacher in, maybe more of a stronger defensive system. Is that really the way Roscommon should be playing to suit their strengths?
For me, it's not. You know, there's been a lot of debate over the past number of years about defensive football and, you know, dropping numbers back. But people don't understand that there's a difference in every single play that you get or that you go up against, dropping everyone back. You know, if a team's having a slow build-up, then that's a time to filter numbers back and get your half-back line set up, get your midfielders set up, and not on every attack. And I was disappointed coming out and seeing Roscommon in the first half, every single attack just filtering 14, 15 men behind the ball, because that doesn't get you till that level anymore. That'll get you till a certain point in a game. Then you need to come out and win it. And it's very, very hard to flick the switch in the game to go from defence to attack. And yesterday they have good forwards, Conor Cox, the Murtas, Shane Killorn. They have really, really good players. And yes, they got to a certain stage where I think it was 1-3 to 6 points, and I was expecting them to kick on, just never materialised. And I was disappointed, and you know that probably has that Stephen Poacher effect on it, where, you know, gets as many men behind the ball as possible and break at speed. But there is Team Dublin do it. Dublin get 13, 14, 15 men behind the ball at certain stages, but they don't do it every play. You'll see that they'll leave Con and Kieran Kilkenny, those type of players, up the pitch on numerous occasions and hurt you, but that style of play is gone. And on every attack or in every attack or defence, that style of play is gone. I'm not a fan of it. I was expecting more from Roscommon. You know, a 5-point defeat, just limped out of the championship.
One last question for you about the word around Tyrone. When are we going to see all of Tyrone's best players on the field together? Is everybody fit? Is McShane fit?
As far as I'm aware, he's training. He's been training really, really well. I think they had a game, a bit of an in-house game a couple of weeks ago, and he was operating really, really well. I know we hadn't seen him in the championship or in the league, and that's probably where people look for signs of who's coming in and who's ready to play. We hadn't seen much of him, so I don't know about Darragh Canavan. I don't know if he's fit. I don't know if he's going to be able to make the first round if they're lucky to get over Cavan. But Tyrone's probably stuck in a bit of a crossroads where they've had a new management and they're trying to put in a style of play together where they're trying to get more bodies up the pitch. But it's not going to work overnight. I do believe that Cal McShane will see game time this weekend. I'm hoping that he comes in, around 40 minutes, and it'll be a serious lift to Tyrone because they're lacking that focal point in the full forward line. I don't think Conor McKenna's the man. I think McKenna would be a far better midfielder. I haven't seen him play there at all, and because when we look back to the AFL time, we've seen all the highlights reels, we've seen all the thing, and we've seen him breaking lines with the ball, punching holes, and to me that's the perfect thing for Tyrone in the middle of the field. Set someone up beside him who can probably cover him defensively, punch holes. He's a great kick pass of the ball, get McShane back, and Tyrone will be in a better, healthier place.
Yeah, really looking forward to seeing that. Hopefully Darragh Canavan is fit for after, fingers crossed, from a Tyrone perspective, they get over Cavan. Kyle, good stuff. Thanks a million for joining us. Cheers.
No problem.
Kyle Coney giving us some thoughts there on the weekend's Gaelic football action. Your views are coming in by text on 087 918 180 and also, of course, on the YouTube channel. We'll get to those in a couple of minutes' time. We're going to take a quick break, then we're talking hurling with James Skehill next.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Nah, not those Lions. 3 Lions we can get behind.
And he hoofed it.
There's more pressure being ratcheted up with a loss like that, of course. Just getting the head boxed off you, that just kind of happened.
For all your Lions coverage this summer, download the OTB Sports app.
Sean, what's that thing going round the garden?
That is our new Husqvarna Automower.
Automower?
Yeah, it's a robotic lawnmower from Husqvarna. Cuts the grass automatically, has GPS tracking and an app. Even works in the rain. I just thought, why spend time cutting grass when I could spend it with the family?
Great! You can put the dinner on, so...
No can do, love. Have to paint the man cave.
Husqvarna Automower. Never mow again. Learn more at husqvarna.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
OK, it's 12 minutes past 9 this morning here, and it's time for us to turn our attention to hurling. I'm delighted to say James Skehill is with us. James, that was quite the weekend of hurling. We're kind of waiting for the football championship to take off, but Jesus, the hurling championship exploded into life. I don't know where to start. Yeah. We could start with the penalty, but maybe we'd be better off actually starting with Galway going out against Dublin.
Jeez, yeah, what a place to start this time of the morning. It was a poor game, let's be honest about it, guys. I was expecting an awful lot more from Galway. I think everybody was. I came away very, very disheartened. Like, there was an awful lot of things that were done badly by Galway. Like, if I can take mistakes and I can take, errors and bad shooting, but I just can't take lack of passion, lack of fight, lack of heart. We didn't show up at all. So that was the most disappointing aspect for me. And then when you lose a game of that magnitude, it puts you into basically a condensed championship now, which makes Galway's task all the harder to get to an Ireland final. And I can't take away from Dublin either. They obviously analysed Galway to the T. They looked at Cathal Manning and said, if we can shut him down, we go a long way to shutting Galway down. They did exactly that. They got their good players on the ball. Their good players did the damage. And they got the right scores when it was needed. So credit to Dublin and credit to Mashikini that they were full value for the victory. But from a Galway perspective, there's a lot of soul searching to do.
If you're in that dressing room, James, in those scenarios where you feel that coming away from the game there wasn't enough fight or enough heart, do you ever manage to come to a realisation in the week afterwards as to why that was?
Yeah, I kind of experienced something similar myself in 2013, a Leinster final against Dublin as well, ironically. And I'll be honest about it, there was a level of complacency within the team at that time. And our preparations were okay. They weren't terribly, terribly sharp. And in the day after, we had to call a meeting amongst ourselves in the Lockery Hotel to discuss, the whole debacle. Because we knew from ourselves, we set standards in training and they weren't met on the pitch on the day of the game, and we had to kind of find out why. And so there was a good few harsh conversations had. There was some constructive criticism. There was no real finger pointing as such. And I'd imagine something very similar could happen, this week, today, tomorrow, because as you can see now, let's say Galway haven't got the time to wait a week or wait 2 weeks. The draw is going to be made tomorrow, I think, so they're going to know their opponents immediately. They're going to have to try and bury that game as soon as they can. So that's getting it out of the way today, tomorrow. And, it just looked like something that really stood out to me at the weekend was when I watched the game after the Kilkenny-Wexford game, it looked like that Kilkenny were practicing hurling, and that Galway were practicing systems. Because even Galway's, their whole demeanour around the ball, they were so lethargic. Their first touch, their jab lifts, hand passing, the most basic of skill that you teach young guys was off the pace entirely. And that only really happens as such when your head is off the pace. You know what I mean? And I was just looking, and Dublin created a pace of a game that Galway they went with. So Galway didn't try to change it up at all. The puckouts were lethargic, the sidelines were lethargic, the frees were lethargic. Everything was it looked like it was drained of energy. And they got no spark, So no player created a spark, no player created something that the crowd could get behind, the rest of the team could G up, And when they did, then that was then coupled by, a couple of errors after the game. So essentially it was 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and they just couldn't get after the game. So there will be a lot of soul searching done today, tomorrow, and they're going to have to just bury that game as soon as they can, because there's no point dwelling on it. They can't change the results at this stage. So there's a lot to discuss, but there's a lot to do as well.
Is that fixable?
It is fixable. Like I'll be honest, it's terribly hard to fix. Like I'd like a lot more time. Like I'm seeing there's something in the region of 5-6 games in 35 days you're getting to the Royal Final. That's a serious amount of battling to do to get to the Royal Final, and you're going to come up against a team like Limerick or probably Tipperary who are going to have 1 or 2 games less, in a longer period of time. So the result of the issue with yesterday's result is performance, yes, absolutely. But then further down the line is also how much they have to do in such a short space of time. And we saw last year that we had to go through, the qualifiers as well, but we had 1 game less and we still came up and lost a bit of energy against Limerick in the semi-final. So the ramifications of yesterday are quite severe. But I do think some of the senior members now of the team are going to have to really, really grab this by the scruff of the neck and just try and fix it as best they can. It's going to be an attitude change. And I reckon if they had an in-house match this evening, they'd knock Lumsford out of one another, just to kind of get rid of some of that frustration, because the performance was so below par, so below par. But as I said before, credit to Dublin,
For sure, like it is just so unusual when we have these conversations. But it's even more unusual, James, when you have people in the squad who know what it takes to win in All Ireland. They've been there. They know exactly the level he had to get to those few years ago to actually get over the line. So they know in training if something's off, I presume.
Yeah, it's kind of I use the phrase, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. We've been there before. We've had these performances. Like we know that when we come up to Croke Park, with even 1% of complacency or any kind of lack of energy towards the game, we're going to be getting caught. And like Galway, we've won 5 All-Irelands in the last 100 years. We've won 5% of the All-Ireland Championships. So it's not as if we have a God-given right to go up and just take home any kind of result or cup. So that really should be in the back of guys' minds. We're not like Kilkenny or Tipperary who have 30 odd, where if you're on a panel for 10 years, you're nearly guaranteed to get an Ireland. So that has to really sink into the guys. That every game they go up to Croke Park, they're going to have to really put in a massive shift, no matter who they're playing. Nowadays, because every team, as I said, is as fit as each other, as strong as each other. It's going to come down to the day and who wants it. And everybody wants to win. That's obvious. But who has the bigger will to win? That's the bigger one. We all go up, we want to win. Yeah, it'd be lovely to go up and get the results and come home, fantastic. But the will to win has got to be way higher than the want to win. And that's where we're completely outfought. That was the worrisome issue. And then when we brought on some substitutes, let's say, and I just listened to the commentary on the game, and the phrase was, we have a lot of experience coming on now. This is the very experienced hurler coming on. And, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do, was bring on experience, because if we were in front, experience would count nearly for a bit more, do you know what I mean? Whereas when you're kind of behind, you're looking for a spark, you're looking for a bit of pace, a bit of energy, something to ignite a performance, because that wasn't there at all, So I would have liked to see more energy come off the bench, like I use a guy like Kevin Cooney, who would be Joseph Cooney's younger brother. massive pace. He could have done damage in there. Jarlath Mannion, the massive pace. I'd have loved to see them guys come in and just give them a chance, because the game was going so bad anyways. What was the difference? Like, just throw them in, get them some championship experience and see how they go on, because we don't know if they're tested at all yet. So, look, there's a lot to get answered, both on the pitch and off the pitch, from our perspective.
And so what, in terms of that leadership group, is it they need to get together, talk amongst themselves, and then present back to management about what they think went wrong and try and become unified that way? Yeah, it's something like a couple of efforts. So you'll obviously have the players group will have assessed the game in real time. They'll have felt what was going on. You can get a vibe in a game too. You can feel what way a game is going away from you. Even for me watching the game, I could put myself in their shoes, and you can feel the vibe is not good. Certain instances and the things like the 21-yard free at the very start, and then a second shot saved in the goal, and then a couple of wides, you can just think, oh God, we're in for a dogfight here against these guys, and that's the last thing you want, So the players will have a sense of what they felt in real time. Players would obviously, I would assume they'd have gone back and watched the game yesterday, and then try catch it and see what they're watching on screen, did it match what they felt in real time. They'll piece all that together, then say, as a leadership group and as a team, right? And they'll confer them with the management, who will have obviously watched the analysis. Stats is one thing, let's say, but the actual performance itself, to see what were the major issues. And you're going to have to pick probably 2 or 3 major things they're going to have to alter. You can't go back with 10, 11 points. You haven't got time for that. And plus, players are not going to retain that much information. They will possibly retain 3 points of note. And those 3 or 4 points of note, you're going to have to just introduce into a training exercise or a training regime over the next couple of weeks and try and fix that this week. Because I said earlier, you don't have the time to go through. We're not in pre-season now, so we don't have 6-7 weeks to a game. We've got 13 days. The draw is tomorrow. We've got essentially 4 or 5 days this week to fix what went on last Saturday, and then we've got a week to prepare for the next team. So it's a real war of attrition. But to answer your question rightfully, you're going to have an assessment from the players, an assessment from management. They'll piece it together and then pull forward 3 or 4 major points that they're going to have to improve drastically if they're going to move forward. Let's talk about the Wexford-Kilkenny game. You talked about the skill set of the Kilkenny players in particular, and it looked like they were practicing the skills of hurling. Were you taken aback a little bit by Wexford? Because I think largely most of us had kind of thought that Wexford's race had been run, but that was a performance which is up there with almost any of the ones they've had over the last couple of years. Yeah, we get these games from time to time, and it happened to be Kilkenny-Wexford this weekend, and it was just, it's exactly what the doctor ordered. We as a hurling community, and as a fan base, and as a country, I think needed that game. We needed that level of excitement, and it was just an absolute enthralling game. And full credit to Wexford, I would have wrote them off. I was actually thinking in my own head that Kilkenny, Galway, Tipperary, and Limerick would win by a cumulative 30 points. That was what was in my head over the weekend. And I was obviously wrong with Galway, but yourself. But Wexford did a fantastic showing. They just the game plan they utilised was what we've seen before, a real running energy game, and the way the game petered out when it had to go on for 90 minutes, they hadn't got it in the legs. That's one way of assessing. But then I also Kilkenny, they tracked Wexford, they marked Wexford, they hit them with every tackle, they stopped every run in that last 20 minutes, and they're never beaten. They're the hardest team in the world to beat because they have that, what would you call it? It's an insatiable hunger. And it's credit to Brian Cody, who was at the helm for 20 odd years. I don't even know at this stage. I was probably in national school when he took off, but he has this drive built into him, and I think it's so hard for any of the squads to replicate, and it's very hard to even explain or to point out. But when you meet them, they're frothing at the mouth nearly, is the best way I can put it, to get at the ball, to get at you, to put in a tackle, and it's all the guys that come on. So they're bench they contributed in the region of 1-9, which was huge. Wexford's was 1-1, and Kilkenny managed the game very well when they went to man down. They did excellently, really, when they lost their goalkeeper, and after conceding a penalty. And you can touch on that further now with the game that went on yesterday. But Wexford surprised me, they did with their performance. I will think they'll be very disappointed with regard to being 3 points up and time up. Also, they had a man, obviously, as I just spoke, they were a man up and didn't utilise. It kind of had flashbacks of the Tipperary game in 2019, whereby they had a man up and their puck-out strategy didn't work. So Kilkenny gave them the ball to stay in their own 45-yard line from puck-outs, and they invited Wexford on. And I think it was tired bodies, tired minds, and Kilkenny just shut them down. They forced Wexford to make mistakes, and Kilkenny closed out the game. And then they brought on big players who created big moments, hence Wally Walsh's goal, Owen Murphy's save again.
who would be thanking the lucky stars with Hawkeye, you know. But like again, when he was counted to get over a mistake like that and make a great save that he did on Rory O'Connor, as a credit to them. And they're going to be full value for favourites in the Leinster final.
Okay, let's talk about the penalty issue in the Clare Tip game, with the penalty in the sin bin results from a foul which is quite far from goal, and the criticism of the referee in all of the papers today is unstoppable. There's like nothing that James Owens did right in that scenario, according to everybody in the papers today. Do you have any sympathy with him applying the law and being forced to apply the law as it's written, or do you think, screw that, use your common sense and don't ruin the game?
No sympathy whatsoever. None. We need common sense. We need people with a level head in those situations to look around them and to assess what could have happened. You know, say obviously when he assesses how many Clare guys are going to be back. So Jake Morris is on the 21 on the sideline. He's just about to rise the ball. When he rises the ball, that's catch number 1. So he's got one catch right there. He's now got 35 yards to travel with one catch left. You know, I think people haven't realised that. And Clare have 2 defenders plus a goalie back. So what you're going to have is Jake Morris will take the ball through 7 or 8 yards. As soon as the contact going to come, he's going to have to catch again. That's catch number 2 gone. Now he's got to strike it. Now he's still 25 yards away from goal. That is not a goal scoring chance. For me, the rule needs to be applied as such. A bit like soccer, when there's a last man back, and if you tackle the last man back through a goal, it's a red card. For me, hurling is the same thing. There needs to be clear sight of the goalie. The forward has to be one-on-one, clear through, on with the goalie, and the forward, or the back, pulls him down cynically. That was the objective of the rule. That's why we saw just so many issues in years previous with guys nearly rubble tackling guys coming down. That's the actual situation the rule should be applied to. Like what James Owens did there, and I don't think anyone's touched on this, as I said about the Galway performance, the ramifications of such a decision are absolutely huge. And I can see why Brian Lohan, and credit actually to Brian Lohan, in every interview that I've seen after, he's been very cool and composed, which I hope feeds into his team. But the decision was so ludicrous, the only word I can use, that the ramifications it has that for Clare season is massive. You're now taking a group of guys from Clare who've trained for months. You've created a decision like that out of madness, let's say, from James Owens' perspective, and you've ruined their Munster Championship and put them into a dogfight with teams over the next 4 or 5 weeks. You know, and people will say, "Oh, Clare didn't react well for the 10 minutes," but they were actually after getting 2 or 3 sucker punches. That sin bin would have frustrated a team, and I can guarantee you it fed into the whole team because of how outrageous the decision was. And they just didn't recover. They conceded the penalty, and then poor Eva Quilligan made a simple error for a second goal off Seamus Cannon, third goal, and that was it. That was the fight over, and that was kind of strike 1. Strike 2 is when the fact that there was no consistency at all applied when Aaron Shanahan was fouled up the far side a few minutes later. That probably galled the Clare supporters and Brian Lohan as a whole. And I understand, I'm putting myself in Clare's shoes here first and foremost as a player. You would have prepared vigorously over the last couple of months waiting for this championship. They were well primed, they were well in the game, very, very well in the game. And then a decision like that just comes and it hampers the whole game. The contest essentially was over. It was gone. The whole thing petered out. It became a challenge game. I know the results showed 4 points of a lead or victory for Tipperary. It was far from that, you know, let's be honest about it. And I know it was mentioned last night in the Sunday game about James Owen making a mistake, but there's levels to mistakes, you know.
Yeah, I suppose,
levels here.
So I think that he probably, when it's assessed, it's going to be very interesting to see what the assessor says, that like there's definitely been talk that these fouls within the 21, whether or not the goal scoring opportunity is clear, it's going to be given. And I think that probably there was a diktat that if it's inside the 21, you're going to give this, and we're all going to give this, and it's going to be a united front. But let's wait and see what comes from that, because obviously I'd like to hear from him. That would be a great thing for them to put him forward over the next day or two to do some...
But are they? Are they going to put him forward?
They won't. They won't.
You know,
they won't. And
like,
you know, that's
like,
the...
Let's be honest, they're not. Like, you know, it's hard enough to get referees. I can appreciate the referees a very difficult job. You know, but if Jake Morris was fouled, if a free was given on the corner of the 21, and Seamus Cannon or Jason Ford pops over the bar, I can guarantee you Liam Sheedy wouldn't have said a word. Jake Morris wouldn't have said a word. They'd have taken the free. It was complete shock to Tipperary as well that they're after being awarded a penalty. Now they'll take it.
Yeah.
But you know, the application of the law, there has got to be common sense here. Else games are going to get full games are going to get decided on this. It's one thing conceding a goal, but then losing a player. You know. Let's
just briefly talk about that, because what they've done in soccer is that they've removed the red card and penalty. It's now generally just a penalty, unless obviously there is some instances in which they still give the red card. But mostly, if you commit a foul like that, then they're not giving you the red card, they're giving you the penalty. It's a very significant punishment for a 10-minute sin bin and a penalty, particularly in a sport like hurling, where most teams, maybe with the exception of Wexford, are great at actually using the extra man nowadays.
Yeah. I think that the punishment is obviously a goal conceded and a man lost, and the punishment is quite severe in terms of the crime. Let's be frank about it. It's huge. In soccer, you get a few, maybe you get 6, 7, maybe 8 opportunities for a goal in a game. You might come away at 1 or 2 if you're lucky. So like if a through on goal, let's say, a penalty is just reward for that, because there's so few and far between. In hurling, you have ample opportunities for goals, and for scores. So I think I'm championing the fact that the sin bin rule has to be abolished entirely. I think the rule was made for the sake of making a rule. I think if a guy is through on goals and there is, as I said, clear sight to the goalkeeper, and he's within 20, even 25 yards from me, give or take, let's say, that's you apply the advantage rule as best you can, and then you give a penalty, and that's it. That's just reward, I think, for what kind of crime was committed. And I'd say, I don't know, I'm not sure actually if this rule is going to be applied into next year's championship. It's going to be reassessed in Congress, but I would hope they'd look at it,
Okay. We barely any time left, but I want to talk about the Limerick-Cork game, and the shoot-on-sight policy resulted in massive amounts of wides for both teams. What's the story here in terms of a trend? Is it what's happening in the game where really top-quality teams are having massive amounts of wides?
Yeah, I think what happens is that you have the shooting zone or the shooting area has gotten larger. In the years previous, let's say, if you go back, I have to go back to the mid-90s up to the early 2000s, within the 45, let's say, if you draw an arc from inline around a semicircle out to 45 and back to inline, that was kind of your shooting zone. That then kind of, it grew a small bit and came out kind of 55 yards, whereas now it's down as far as your half-back line. You've got guys like Jimmy Burns shooting on sight. You've got guys like Tim O'Mahony, lads who have on Callaghan, they have distance in striking, coupled with the ball issue. We'll talk about that again. But I just think defence nowadays are very packed. You've got excellent athletes in defence who can read and cover markers. You've usually got spare men back. So Limerick usually have Jekyll Hannon sitting back. So trying to hit a free Cork forward becomes a very tricky proposition. Hence why Cork shot on sight. Cork did the same kind of thing. They had Jim Manley and Mark Coleman sitting back deep, trying to cover their inside line, put off supply to Aaron Gillette. And they were relatively successful with that, but then it created just a pure shooting zone from 45 to 45. Anywhere within that, it was just shoot on sight. And I think Cork will look back and they'll see that from the 55th minute to the 65th minute, that game was there for them. That game was there for them, and that's going to be a huge learning curve for those. They had a number of shots that were, as you said, they were 70, 80 yards out. They petered out wide, and again, it sucked the life out of the comeback. They were toying with a 4 or 5 point deficit. They needed to get down to 3, down to 2 to make it a right contest, but it didn't happen, and Limerick closed the game out. The trend itself, I just think the quality of player, there's no such thing as I know Kyle Hayes had number 7 and Jerry Burns number 5 on their back. The number means nothing anymore. What you have in your 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you effectively have 8 guys there who can play one of those 8 positions. So you have a forward playing. Kyle Hayes won man of the match centre forward against Galway in the 2018 final. He's now playing wing back. Declan Hannon started his career full forward for Limerick. He's now playing centre back. So positions mean nothing. It doesn't mean anything what the numbers in their back. So what you have is 8 guys who can essentially rotate into any zone and shoot on sight. And Limerick's pattern of play, and Cork is getting there too, in fairness to them, is so good that they create loads of opportunities for each other. And if you have a bit of space, and nowadays if you have 2 seconds on the ball, 2.5 seconds, you've got time for a strike. There's a good ratio with the tackles to possession. So if you have a team who can create 3 possessions before a tackle is hit, that team is usually winning heavily. So in Limerick's instance, you can usually apply about a tackle every 2 possessions. So if Mark Coleman gets the ball at possession 1, passes to Tim O'Mahony in possession 2, they can usually apply a tackle. That's how good they are. But with teams against Limerick are so good at creating space that the tackle ratio goes high, and they create a plethora of opportunities from shooting from afar. So I just think teams playing against Limerick get sucked into a certain type of game. And it becomes a shooting cycle, and Limerick's quality of shooting is just better than everywhere else. Simple as that.
Right, that is really interesting. I hadn't realised that that was the formula that teams have, and the time on the ball is obviously so important. James, we're getting into really, really brilliant stuff here. Thanks a million. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we'll definitely come back to that in more detail. All of the best part about the hurling championship is all the teams are still in it. So that's James Skehill giving us his thoughts this morning at 9:33. You're watching OTB AM. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette. I want to tell you about what's coming up on tomorrow's show. Obviously, we'll have European semi-finals preview and lots more to get into as well. We're going to announce the winner of our performance ranking competition in just a couple of minutes' time as well. But right now, we're going to bring you the Sunday paper review with Bernard Jackman and Michael Verney.
Bernard Jackman, Michael Verney, both with us. Michael, that front page story on the Sunday Times, the GAA, they've unveiled their committee to look into the slitter, so they'll consider everything: the weight of the ball, the bounciness, the size of the rims, the materials in its makeup. This has been much talked about for several seasons now, I would say, Michael, and in particular over the last couple of weeks. Too easy to score points is the general consensus. Are you in favour of doing something about the slitter?
Well, I tell you what, if you were looking at Galway yesterday in Croke Park, you wouldn't say it was too easy. You couldn't have had any money on them putting up the tally that they did put up. But it's good to see that they are reacting to it. And obviously, some very big GAA heads and big hurling heads amongst that committee. So it's good to see it. I did a piece there a couple of weeks ago just comparing the averages of points scored or tally scored in each league game. And it actually jumped up 7 points in this year's league compared to any other league in history. So it was 41 points on average scored in last year's league, and it jumped up to 48 this year. Now, there's a combination of factors. The weather, the time of the year, the fact that the league maybe wasn't as competitive this year, but the ball is definitely something that does need to be looked at. I know James Skehill was on with your good selves talking about the size of the rims, and the rims are definitely much smaller, and it does make it easier to control a ball now, and makes it easier to strike a ball 100 yards accurately as well. So it's good to see that they're on top of it straight away. Ned Quinn is obviously chairing that committee, so yeah, it'd be interesting to see the findings that they have. I don't think it's not massive changes that are needed with the ball. It's probably just maybe a slightly bigger rim, and maybe it's only talk about a couple of grams of weight, just to make sure that it's not a flick of the wrist from 100 yards that puts the ball over the bar. But I think it's interesting when spectators were back in grounds yesterday, and particularly that first game in Croke Park, how the pressure heightened on players and how much. Maybe we saw in last year's Winter Championship just how easy it was to score and how little pressure there was on, and it's hard to beat that kind of cauldron kind of feeling or the effect that it puts on players. And that was something they didn't experience last year, and they didn't experience much during the league. So I always like to see mistakes, I always like to see misses, because it's nearly more entertaining to see how a lad reacts or how a team reacts to a mistake. So I think looking at the ball is a key thing in hurling, just to make sure that we're not running away with ourselves, and we're not, it's not 225 to 224 every day we go out.
Yeah. So we've lots to get through. There's loads of Euros coverage. There's loads of hurling reports on a box office day yesterday. There's a great DJ Carey interview on his pro-am, Roy McIlroy. Paul Kimmage is writing about horse racing, FAI finances. There's Liam Brady in the Mail on Sunday as well with Philip Quinn. There's some Wimbledon pieces I know, Michael, you wanted to get to. On the rugby front, Bernard, 2 games yesterday. Just to start in Ireland for a moment, 39 points to 31 win against Japan. Peter O'Reilly here, 3,000 punters granted the privilege of watching Japan in the flesh. They're a joy to behold, he writes. He makes the point, Ireland outscored Japan by 5 tries to 4 yesterday, but when the visitors were at full pelt, you felt you were watching rugby as it was meant to be played. Daring and darting, everyone alert to the possibilities presented by a turnover, quick to see space and to run into it. Whereas 4 of Ireland's 5 tries were effectively conceived in the video analysis suite and honed on the training pitches, Japan brought spontaneity, epitomised by their fly half, who created 2 tries with the invention of his kicking from the hand. Caelan Doris and Jacob Stockdale attempted to emulate Japan's offloading game, but their strike rate was poor. At times Ireland looked rusty, hardly surprising, seeing as none of them had played in over a month. And I must say, watching the game yesterday, almost surprising that Ireland went in at the break leading somehow, because there was a 20-minute spell there in that first half in particular where Japan were just cutting loose, and it was, as Peter O'Reilly says, a joy to watch. And you kind of thought, well, that's the rugby I'd like us to play, and that's the rugby I'd like to watch every week.
Yeah, and that's the rugby that we said we were going to start to transition towards after the Rugby World Cup. If you remember, there was David Nucifora said there was a skills deficit in our game, and unfortunately 2 years on, when you watch that game yesterday, I think it's commonly accepted. Well, I would say that Japan are the more skillful side, both in terms of their speed of thought, an ability to spot an opportunity and take it, but also their all-around speed of handling, footwork in contact. Some of their attacking kicks were phenomenal, and that's probably the area that disappointed me the most, or has disappointed me the most, in terms of we were always seen as being expert kickers, and we used to be told, or certainly the English and the Welsh and Scots, that we have a natural advantage because of Gaelic games. But I think we've seen other teams get much better quite quickly in terms of their range of attacking kicks, and I think Japan showed us yesterday what you can do in terms of that ability to kick pass or find space in behind. I know Joey Carberry had a little chip over that he regathered and we scored from it. So it's not across the board. Jack Carty, Johnny Sexton, etc. are phenomenal kickers, but I think the Japanese skill set is far better. And yesterday, I think we were able to overpower them, and I think they ran out of steam a little bit, which is very unusual. But the last 20 minutes, they had a lot of ball, but they seemed to be fatigued, and our defence got on top. But certainly for 60 minutes, I thought they showed us how the game can be played in a different way. And I think we always will have to be good at the structured stuff, and that's an area that we are good at, and that's what led us to the game yesterday. But I think we would like to see a development in terms of the unstructured. And it's interesting, I mean, for a country that are chasing to be more skillful, I don't think we have a skills coach at the moment. So Richie Murphy was a skills coach. He's now head coach of the under-20s, and he hasn't really been replaced. So, it's not really aligned. And, look, at the lads did well to win. There was huge effort, etc., but definitely I think they showed us there's a level of skill that we still have to strive to get to.
I was thinking the same thing. I thought, geez, 2019, this is a nice check-in to see how much Ireland have progressed in the departments that they wanted to progress in after that 2019 defeat. And the answer was probably not all that much when you saw Japan in full flow. So there was consensus across the board on this. Neil Francis, for instance, he says, at the Aviva, if this Irish performance was revenge for the World Cup, well, this dish was served straight out of the microwave. For long periods, Ireland were simply embarrassed by Japan's pizzazz and mental agility. The Japanese still have a stronger command of the basics, and their passing and handling left Ireland looking like second-class citizens when it came to this particular skill. He talks about the Japanese 11 offloads, and then Ireland had 4. But what the stats don't tell you is that when Ireland tried almost as many as the Japanese, except they ended up being reported as handling errors or turnovers. It's embarrassing to consider that when Ireland tried to get into the spirit of things, they were hopelessly inadequate in terms of trying to master a skill that's almost totally alien to them. Anticipation is the key here. Most Irish players are looking for a clear out as opposed to receipt of an offload when an Irish ball carrier is tackled. When the ball does get popped up, it's treated as if it's a successor to the Delta variant, which is another good line. So, but again, this is stuff we've been saying for a long time, Bernard, that the Irish are very ruck focused. They're not alive to the possibility of offloads, and it's a skill set that seems alien to them. And you kind of, we see the odd offload here or there, and we think, oh, this is great progress. And during the Six Nations, we've gone up to 4 offloads today, and that's better than the 2 we had the week before. And then Japan come along and they just show us a different plane altogether.
Yeah, but the interesting thing, Joe, is that probably the game seems to be going towards that offload, keep the ball alive, to use Ronan O'Gara's phrase. If you look at what's happening elsewhere, so Wales won the Six Nations. Wayne Pivac with Scarlets, and what he's trying to do with Wales is play with real ambition and play with high tempo and playing on your feet. The Exeter Harlequins final in the Premiership last week was an incredibly high-scoring game. Harlequins had the worst defence in the Premiership, won the title. Bristol were the top team at the end of the season in terms of the league before it went to the playoffs. One of the top attacks. France play a good attacking game. Toulouse, La Rochelle, the 2 European finalists. The final was a bit there, but in general, they're teams who have a real focus on skillful players playing attacking rugby, taking risks. So it looks like the Springboks won the World Cup with a set piece defense, kicking game mindset, but at the moment, attack seems to be a way that a lot of teams are chasing. Our focus on attack is a way a lot of teams are chasing success and getting reward for that. So it's not just that we want to go and see our team entertain us. I think it can actually be a brilliant way to play the game, very, very enjoyable. It can help you, it can win, especially if you're not as physically dominant as England can be or South Africa can be, which we aren't. I mean, we don't have, 30 power athletes. We always have to think a little bit smarter, play a little bit smarter. So, it's not just that we want to sit there and clap and enjoy, a high tempo game and skills. I think we can actually do both together. And I think, to be honest, the profile of our players is we have to go down that route because we aren't set up to be a dominant defensive set piece kicking game team.
Yeah. Did you catch any of the rugby yesterday, Michael, or were you head deep into the hurling, I'd say, at that stage?
Yeah, no, it was wall-to-wall GAA. I drove down to Portlaoise yesterday. The Offaly Miners were playing the Leinster final, and that carried over to listening to Galway and Dublin on the radio, and then catching it on TV, and then catching Kilkenny and Wexford on TV, and then Cork and Limerick on TV. So there wasn't much room for anything else. But just something Bernard was saying there I thought was interesting. As a coach, Bernard, how easy or difficult is it to make that transition? Like we're talking, like we want more offloads, we want more of an expansive game. Like are you talking about a complete sea change in how your sessions are taking place day to day, or is it a gradual kind of a process? And how do you make those integrations in training sessions almost, so that you're basically trying to change the way you play and the culture, the type of game? How exactly does that manifest itself on day to day? Like,
yeah, look, I think you need to set out your philosophy. So in fairness, and this is the worrying thing for me, is that when Mike Catt came in, he said all the right things about where he wants to go in terms of evolving our game, giving players freedom to make decisions, to take risks, etc. And then you would obviously like to be consistent in terms of that philosophy. So if the coach, 3 months in after a couple of defeats, changes tact and says, look, no, we're going to be risk adverse, well then that can lead to problems. But I haven't seen or heard anything from our management or players to say that there has been a step back or a shift. So you would like to believe that all the training and all the reviews, etc., and selection should be based around picking the best players, preparing the players in the best way to deliver that. And at international level, you can do that. You have freedom of choice in terms of selection, and also you freedom in terms of how you set up to play. So I think there hasn't been the transfer from training ground to pitch that we would have liked, and that's obviously a worry. But I think you can change it quite quickly. I mean, players are adaptable. They would have been used to lots of different playing styles all the way through their career, and generally a pre-season is the best time to do it. I've seen coaches change tact in season and within a week, change the philosophy. Now normally it's easier to close up a little bit, quickly rather than open up. But yeah, that's the worrying thing for me, is that I haven't seen a big improvement. And now I know there's been different challenges with COVID, but they have actually been in camp a long time since the World Cup. So that's a little bit disappointing or concerning.
Yeah, because you were definitely very down on what you saw in the Six Nations right up until the England game.
Yeah, and look at that. And the England game was great, but my fear is that was built on a lot of emotion of CJ's last game, emotion of the fact it was England. The players felt under pressure. And England also, let's be honest, they had a shock in Six Nations. I mean, they had a massive review, an audit of the performance. So it's still, in my mind, it's still to be proven that wasn't an outlier, and that we've turned a corner. Look, at yesterday was a win. The coaches will take positives from it, etc. But I still would like to see more evidence that we really have turned the corner. And England was great. In that 80 minutes, there was a huge amount of positives. But in the cold light of day, when you look at the England that turned up and what they'd done in the previous 5 games, there were signs that they're not really at the top. And I think Eddie Jones is actually now, he's evolving. He's looking to see where the next trend is, and he'll be very good at chasing that and getting that right. And I just fear that maybe we're getting caught up in little short wins, like beat Japan with a very experienced team. Yeah, we're sorted. Whereas the reality is, if we come out of this 2-match block and we haven't really found three players who can start for us in November, it's been a waste. And I know Andy Farrell has to win the game, etc. But like giving Gavin Coombs 12 minutes Craig Casey, I know there was a reason with backs injuries, etc. 74 seconds or whatever. It's not really given guys who've shown up during the year an opportunity to do something. And next week against America, it's going to be far easier. So even if someone shoots the house down next week, Japan was more of a test opportunity to really see what someone was like. But look, that's international rugby, and Andy Farrell's coach for a reason. But yeah, I do think that.
Lads, just to finish up on the rugby, Michael, I apologise here. Can we stick with this egg chasing for just one more short section? I'd say you spit in the ground when you saw that ad. This is rugby country, did you?
I wouldn't say spit in the ground now, but I wouldn't exactly be lauding it or anything.
I wouldn't be lauding it either, just to be clear.
Well, it's rugby country for the next 2-3 minutes if I can. Just on the lines yesterday, Bernard. So Neil Francis, for instance, says, well, I mean, it's all absolutely pointless, really, some of these warm-up games at this stage. He said in years gone by, South African provincial sides would perform the job of softening up the lines, and then it would also mean that the lines were tested physically, battle-hardened. That's simply not the case anymore. The whole concept of this type of touring is archaic. These matches don't tell us anything that more than we already know. They're a complete waste of time. He does concede, however, it's important to navigate the run-up to the Test series without accumulating injuries, build a bit of momentum, and get the Test team humming, or at least functioning. The only positive thing we got yesterday was that nobody got injured. This was the Lions beating the Sigma Lions by 56 points to 14. So he's had a few things to throw to you. I'm going to throw 3 quick things to get your thoughts on, and then we'll move on. Finn Russell's like one of those slot machine junkies in Las Vegas who takes another spin on the machine without realising that there are consequences to his actions. Yes, some of his cross kicks worked, some of them didn't, but you cannot gamble with the sort of flagrant disregard with which Russell plays the game in a test environment, particularly in a Lions test environment. Whereas a couple of others thought, OK, Russell did reasonably well. He might play himself onto the bench for a test match. Could Russell make the bench as a gamble laid on if the Lions need to win?
Yeah, I would agree with him about Russell. I wouldn't be as harsh as Fano, but I don't think many people can. But yeah, I wouldn't have him starting a test match for the Lions in this series.
Okay.
But certainly, if the game was gone against you, yeah, he has the ability to unlock defences. So potentially impact player off the bench,
right?
But maybe not even the 23.
But your worry would be then your out half gets injured in the first 5 minutes, and Finn Russell is guiding you through, I guess. Okay, next to Neil Francis then. He said he also had impressions confirmed that Johnny Hill is one of the worst second rows ever to be picked by the Lions.
Yeah, and he called him, he said, compared him to Benny Hill, which again is incredibly harsh, and only Neil could do it. I don't agree with that. I think Johnny Hill is a very good player.
Okay.
He wasn't dominant yesterday, but no, he's a good player.
Okay, and then yesterday, the first time, Neil Francis said he spent looking at Chris Harris to see why he was brought on tour. I've watched matches over the last season or two where the Scottish centre was an active participant, and I'm still at a loss to understand Warren Gatlin's extraordinary leap of faith. I did notice that Brendan Fanning on the next page, and this is the beauty of rugby, I suppose, and opinions, he said Chris Harris made a very positive impression at 13. So where are you on the Harris debate there?
Harris is good. I think Neil has had an issue with Harris before the tour. I don't think he's judging him fairly on yesterday's performance. So I think Bundy and Robbie have a cracking chance. They did well, but Harris is a good player, and he's definitely a profile that Gatlin could use regularly in this competition.
Well, I found the harshness of his column thoroughly enjoyable, I have to say.
No, absolutely.
And then just one last one, and this is the real one I want to get your thoughts on, and we'll leave the Lions because I don't know how much there is to say about 56 points to 14. The Sigma Lions will be the weakest opposition that the British and Irish Lions will face on this tour. Just on Owen Farrell, Stuart Barnes here on page 19 is talking about the Owen Farrell situation. He was saying it was a good thing not to make Farrell the captain yesterday because it would be a burden on him and there's enough pressure on him as he's trying to rediscover his form. So on Farrell, he said twice he lost possession. He was uncomfortable in the role of heavy-duty carrier, which I suppose won't surprise anyone. And then while his organising and encouraging tones echoed around an empty Ellis Park, there were few tangible positives. It was his missed tackle that set an uninspired home team en route for the try line, slow to adopt his position, sloppy in the tackle. It was an undoubted negative in these early days. And then he says, frankly, the first 40 minutes were a reminder that he's struggling for form. The idea of 12 is not without merit, especially as a backup kicker with Russell on the bench, but he is devoid of confidence. And then he said Gatland gave Farrell 20 minutes at fly half. He did nothing wrong, but if he is to start the series, he needs to be doing a lot more. So that was Stuart Barnes in the Sunday Times talking about Owen Farrell. It's amazing on Farrell. Lots of like really shrewd operators in the punditry world that you would turn to all the time have just diametrically opposed views on Farrell at 12 or not at 12. So even just in the last week, I know Shane Organ really likes him as that second playmaker at 12. Obviously, Eddie Jones likes him at 12. Gatland has played him at 12 in New Zealand. And then equally, Luke Fitzgerald says it's an abomination of an idea to put him at 12. At 10, you've got a really good physical 10. Put him in 12 and suddenly South Africans look at that midfield and think, well, we mightn't run over them, but they're certainly not going to dominate us in defence. Ronan O'Gara was on the show this week, said Farrell's 10. It's 10. Yeah, the further you push him away from 10, you dilute him. So where are you on this Farrell at 10 or 12 thing? And like, what is the logic either way? Is it just down to size that he can't play there, or what's the story?
Yeah, I see him as a 10 who's a very good 12, depending how you want to play the game. So I can absolutely see the value. I don't think him and Russell are a good combination. Like yesterday, they were trying to use him as a battering ram at time, and their timing was off. I think actually he could be a better 12 with Bigger, who's very similar mindset, both very structured, very organised, and they kind of pre-plan things, whereas Russell likes to play off the cuff, which wouldn't suit Farrell. Yeah, I think he's going to be... I don't think he'll start... I think Bigger's going to start 10 and they'll go for a physical 12 and 13, with maybe being on the bench to come on as a 10 or 12, depending how the game is going. Look, he's had a difficult season with England. He's been in the championship with Saracens. It will take him a little while to get up to speed, and he mightn't have time. You know, he might, based on yesterday's game and his inability to really smash holes against an average enough Sigma lines, he might now be a little bit behind. Robbie obviously having a little hamstring worry might give him another game quickly, which should be advantageous for him. But I think he's a 10 who can play 12 very well. But I think his best shot at starting on this line tour is to start at 10.
Okay. Michael, enough of that nonsense. We're talk
getting into the meat and drink of the weekend
about
now,
the real business. Yeah, let's get on to the real stuff. So, the hurling yesterday, the championship exploded to life. Extraordinary day at Croke Park. Any pieces catch your eye? Can you explain to me what happened in Galway? Do you agree with Davy that Wexford were better than Kilkenny? Give me the good stuff here.
Yeah, it's funny, as you say, a lot of the papers are just full of match reports, and usually you wouldn't be that intrigued by them, but there's lots of interesting little bits and pieces everywhere, and I suppose it didn't really go to script. Like, with the best of it in the world, there's very few, unless they had a really intimate knowledge of Dublin hurling and what's been going on in the camp, that could have predicted what happened in that first game yesterday. Galway obviously missed a lot, but Dublin to a man were brilliant. Players really came of age yesterday, and it's funny, the 2019 win against Galway looked like it was going to be, almost like the rocket fuel for Matty Kenny's reign as Galway manager. Then they're beaten by Laois 2 weeks later, and all of a sudden, 2 years later now, this could just turn around his reign completely and turn around Dublin hurling completely. They have a chance to win the Leinster title. They're in an All-Ireland quarter-final at the very least at this stage, which is huge for them. And as you said about Davy there, like that Kilkenny and Wexford game was brilliant again. There's never been anything between them since Davy has come to Wexford. I think it's 2 wins apiece now and a draw, and I suppose if you include yesterday, it'd be another draw. But that just had so much drama. There's a minute clip going around there. I think Ray Boyne put it up on Twitter, and it's got everything you want in Championship hurling. And as Michael Fennelly commented on it this morning, he just said, like, if a referee wanted to be picky, he could actually probably blow about 20 frees. But it's all action, ball is in play for a minute. There must be 26 players in view at different stages, speed, athleticism, great defensive skills, everything. And that's just kind of what we got yesterday, and all the negative talk about hurling maybe that we've had throughout the league. We've had that before, and I think I said it to you before, Joe. It does, when new rules come in and different interpretations, it does take a couple of games to get used to it. But like yesterday was brilliant, and even Limerick yesterday evening, the air of invincibility is definitely back when you're beating Cork by 8 points with a lot of their big guns not even playing well. You asked me about just a couple of pieces that are interesting today. Obviously, Tip and Clare today is the big game. Interesting piece in the Daily Mail from Philip Lanigan. A big question when you talk about every game, I suppose, that Clare play, the big question is who's going to pick up Tony Kelly. It's the same when Kilkenny play. That's the main question that's asked. And Philip Lanigan just had a couple of great lines on it in today's Mail. Just find him here because he's just such a marquee player that the opposition manager just places so much stock on trying to stop him. And he just had a couple of great lines just at the very start. He just said, "Watch the opposition teams try to deal with Tony Kelly. Feels like one of those magician's tricks, the type that escapologist Harry Houdini made famous, where you put him in a straitjacket, wrap him in chains, put him in a box, and drop him into a tank of water before he magically frees himself to gasps of amazement from a disbelieving audience. The long line of shackles and chains and various tools to tie down hurling's most elusive player have been tried out by various management teams down through the years. It has all been to little discernible effect." And that's just, like, I've said it a couple of times before, Clare have been missing various big guns in recent years. I'd love to know whether Brian Lohan had a conversation with him or it just something clicked in Tony's head where he realises, like, my game is at a really high level, but I'm going to have to take it to another level. And the performance he's delivered with Ballyea for the last 10 years, he's literally delivering them nearly every day with Clare. It's an absolute joy to watch. There was 90 seconds into that game last week against Waterford, and he had this ridiculous point scored over the shoulder that he had no right to even take on. But he just does really, really special things. And the big question is always how you're going to tie him down. And it sounds easy, and maybe it should be easier than you think it is, but he's just so elusive. And I think tying down TJ Reid, it's just such an interesting conundrum for all these different managers, and it's going to be interesting to see what Liam Sheedy does today to try and tie him down. Probably Brendan Matter or Cottle Barrett. And interesting, there's a piece, Dermot Crowe has a profile piece done of Cottle Barrett in the Sindo today, an interesting piece as well. He's obviously had his bits of controversy down through the years, but no doubt that he's one of the best marquee cornerbacks in the game. So if they duel today at some stage, Barrett and Kelly, that's going to be really interesting.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward